Greetings and welcome back to another discussion. I am once again joined by the legendary Hugh Man, or Human as some people refer to him, but I think Hugh Man has a certain flair to it that merely calling him human, which we all are, would strip him of. So we're going to call him Hugh Man. And the original topic of this conversation was meant to be from Melbourne, this epicenter of the many strange things happening in Australia. But given recent events and related issues, we're probably going to get to Melbourne eventually, talk about some other things. Now, before we officially started this, we were talking about the language police on YouTube. And I'm not one of these people who are saying, oh, freedom of speech. I mean, it is a private company. And Susan and her crew and whatever, they can do what they want. But one of the reasons why I was telling Human just now, I think it's unreasonable to try to even figure out which words are appropriate or not, because you end up as effectively a cripple. You're dancing around on one foot, thinking what word you can use and what word is inappropriate. And the problem with that is language needs to be used descriptively. And if a word comes into mind that you want to use to describe something, and you can't use it, you're kind of screwed. And it's just I think it's a worthless guessing game. And I do think that rather than trying to toe the line in some sense, and the most important salient factor here is that we don't even know how to toe the line, because we don't know how the bot works. Is it just speak your mind, which I will continue to do so. I'll use the words that are necessary. I'm in the process of editing up a video that's almost done that will almost certainly, as I mentioned, be demonetized because of the nature of the topic and words used. But if you want to describe something, you got to use certain words. I should remind people back in the day when Barbarossa, even before my time, was the first person on YouTube. We're talking 2009-ish or 2010. I got started about 2010-ish, but I mean, the kinds of he's a very powerful type of language, a lot of swearing and other things. He had a lot more anger in him. Can you imagine? I mean, would any of the knowledge or wisdom that had been disseminated at the time exist now if the restrictions that are in place now existed 7 or 8 years ago? But I think not. And that's why I'm just convinced that I don't want it to happen, but even if everything is demonetized that I put up because they don't like a certain word or phrase, you just have to keep on speaking the way you speak, because for one thing, it's a betrayal of the self. You're not authentic to whatever form of identity you shaped, and I'm a man of words, and I think certain words are useful for describing things, and I'm not going to chuck them out the window because they might not be appropriate. And yeah, that's my view on that.
Oh, well, first of all, thanks for having me on again. That's always a pleasure to talk with you. But one thing that struck me with what you were saying is men already went their own way. We already kind of said, okay, we want to be, not that we wanted to be respectful of them, but we wanted to say, okay, we don't want to offend you, because it's almost pointless talking to children who are triggered by every word and need a fainting couch. So we already went our own way and said, let us play in this corner of the sandbox and we won't bother anyone. We just want to talk with other men and talk openly. And explored a lot of these ideas that particularly you and Barbarossa did a few years ago. And even that now is not good enough, simply because men going their own way has actually increased exponentially. If you look at the stats, they're saying every year it's increasing. Every year women's happiness is decreasing. Marriage is decreasing. All of these things tend to correlate, and it's almost this: what can we do to quell the effect of the tide going in directions we don't want? It's almost like a marketing. When companies see their product isn't working, they come up with a new campaign. They muzzle a competitor or outlets where it makes it hard for their competitors to voice or expose their products, and so theirs is the only product that's on TV at a certain time slot. So I think they're doing that kind of thing with this censorship. And in terms of what you're saying about Barbarossa, with language and censorship, I agree fully. Where the whole reason Barbarossa, and I say less so yourself, but because you don't seem to be inclined to swear as much, just because of your because of your lexicon. I mean, not that you're not you don't get your powerful points of view across, but the whole reason that Barbarossa struck a nerve with so many guys a few years ago was because he was so passionate, and when he wanted to use the word fuck, he didn't say it every sentence, but when he was really passionate and wanted to let you know, it's almost like an exclamation mark in a sentence, especially if you're being eloquent. Using those kind of expletives within sentences really kind of prick a person's ears up when you're communicating. So I like that kind of stuff. It lets you know that the person's passionate. The part of the sentence that they're talking about means something. It's like a heightened peak in the sentence in terms of the communication of what's being said. So all of this sort of stuff where they've got bots that aren't even human beings going along and just deleting things, and you having to make cases and fight for your videos to stay up or be monetized whatever.
Regarding Barbarossa now, I haven't talked to him in ages. So I don't really know what he's doing. People ask me, I don't know. I'm on friendly terms with him, but I talk to him once a year, I think, at best. I would assume that most of those old classic MGTOW videos have been demonetized in his case. I would assume that because now the title, that word is, I think, flagged. MGTOW. Red pill is flagged, it appears. I mean, who knows? There's probably...
Women is probably flagged.
Women is flagged. Well, hero, the word hero appears to be flagged as well, based on my the problem with hero worship, or maybe where it's difficult to know. But
I bet you heroin worship isn't flagged, though.
Well, yeah, that word's not there yet, maybe. But the problem, I mean, it's this playing the contortionist game of language. This is classic. Look, I acknowledge YouTube's right. If Susan wants to run the show this way, then that's the way she's going to run the show. But nonetheless, and I'm not complaining about that because it is a private company. I have to acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm.
But this game has been played before. The game of contortionist language and cutting people off at the mouth. The problem is, as you pointed out, the genie is out of the bag. A bottle, rather. The cat is out of the bag, and the genie's out of the bottle.
Toothpaste is out of the tube.
This was a famous statement. I don't remember his name. In the Nixon administration, when things were going topsy-turvy, as well, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, we can't get it back in. And it made mainstream culture. But yeah, most of the stuff, the red pills, the black pills, these flavorful color, multi-hued pills, they're out there. If not on YouTube, then elsewhere. So it's a little bit late. Well, maybe it's not if they really want to clown. And they could ruin people's livelihood, as they're trying to do with me and other people. Obviously not just me. They can do things to hurt you in a very physical sense, to affect your basically things that would go to the bottommost part of the Maslow hierarchy of needs, food, shelter, etc. But as far as the word having gotten out, the word has been out for a long time on a variety of subjects, and all of which are considered quote-unquote red pill, and all of which are never spoken of in quote-unquote polite company. So they can defeat individuals, and it's their right to try that. It is a private company. They can defeat individuals. They can try to make us play the contortionist game of language and trying to figure out what's appropriate and what's not. Because I honestly don't think it's just a matter of, it's not just a matter of, it's not advertiser friendly. Sure, profit plays a role, and YouTube in general, from all of what I've seen, has been a kind of a losing bet for them, but it's so massive that they can't really risk taking it down. But it's clear they have an ideological goal. I recently I bore witness the first time to Susan, what's her name, Wojcicki, whatever, speaking in a public, and she sounded, I was a bit shocked. She sounded like an old past the Wild Valley girl. That's okay.
Oh, really?
Yeah. She was complaining about being people not taking her seriously or taking women seriously. Now, okay. But as I said, the word is out. The red pills are out there of various sorts. People can ignore them if they choose to, and I think maybe there will always be some element of the niche that normies just don't conform to, but they can hurt the individual. They can even try to hurt the message. But if they want to look at it in terms of damage, cellular decay has already set in, and it's metastasizing. Well, that's probably not the perfect analog, because anyway, the point is the damage is done, and it's at the very least there.
Yeah, and what you're saying about the toothpaste being out of the tube, what I've noticed, I mean, I haven't been online as a YouTube creator for very long. I think it's only been about 9 months.
But in your time, you've reached epic proportions.
Well, look, I'm grateful for my following, but I don't kind of keep track, and now it's kind of slowed down a little, but it never really interested me. I was really happy with the accelerated growth. But what I've noticed is that I think they were happy when they deemed it a bunch of crackpot guys. In their mother's basement. But I think, like I mentioned, the statistics are showing that everything is going downhill in terms of the happiness associated with women's hypergamy, whether it's marriage, men wanting to dote over women, wanting to have traditional relationships, while women conveniently don't want to have traditional relationships in their kind of mindset. Like, the man's stuck in that role while she isn't. So they notice these trends going, and I think what they notice online, as MGTOW's and possibly Cassie J's documentary has brought more light to this, that certain sort of people have taken note and started to, okay, let me take a look and listen to some of these MGTOW guys. Let me listen to some of these, read some of these blogs. And I think what might have happened is they're seeing that they're a bit more eloquent and thought out than they once thought. It's not just guys with fragmented video game minds that are playing first-person shooters, that they expect their vocabulary to be just, as similar, scattershot and nonsensical, and, a lot of bells and whistles with not much content. I think when that may have, as well as a few other things in this year that I've seen, have brought light to men going their own way and the issues, and they've started to take notice and started to go, okay, not just the YouTube money-making side of things and whatever they're doing and however they're trying to, profiteer and run a business model, but those kind of things have kind of they've paralleled and coincided with each other. All I can say is, from my point of view, just I enjoy doing this stuff. Any people are welcome to sort of mirror my videos, as long as you don't monetize or make money off them. I want to keep as much content alive as possible.
It's the Streisand effect, basically. You're familiar with the Streisand effect. When you try to hide something and keep it away from the public, they become more interested. So yeah, that's basically what you've described. Is almost to a T. With, in this case, MGTOW. It could be really any red pill topic, I think. There's a range of topics that does not enter into polite discourse that falls under the rubric of red pill or black pill or whatever. And all of it has now been subject to the Streisand effect, this sort of their attempt to cache all this stuff away someplace, and now it's in the open, and people... I get every now and then, I'm a new subscriber. I never heard of this stuff before. That's really interesting. It does happen. It's not frequent, but I even well, I don't know why, but for the first time ever, I got a donation from a female. I can't for the life of me. I wouldn't say the first time, probably the second time, but the other person was kind of long-standing red pill person overall. So yeah, maybe things really are at the stage where it's the genie is out of the bottle, whatever, toothpaste, whatever analogy you want to draw, metaphor, it is too late. And so I could disappear, I could just die tomorrow, but not maybe my legacy, because I'm not remarkable, but the things I've talked about and the concepts, they will remain. Well, and they definitely will after I'm dead, whether I die tomorrow or 5 years from now. But, or my channel goes under. It doesn't, that, if you want to call it damage, it's done. And I just don't see playing the, sorry, I'll just finish. Again, I don't see, I'm not going to fucking play contortionist games with my language and not say certain things because I'm going to be called out on and I'm going to be demonetized or whatever. I will speak my mind because that is just what I do.
Yeah, like I said, it's almost now, it's irritating enough with a lot of the topics that men going their own way talk about. And there's this kind of defiance and self-esteem associated with it. From what I notice of MGTOW guys lately, there's a lot more as the year goes on, guys being less angry, especially from what I see on my channel, and being able to enunciate sort of ideas a lot better, and sort of still having the same passion, but having that passion being able to be sort of voiced and spoken in sort of in a better way, in a more coherent and clear way. And what you said about videos, things have been spoken, the genie's out of the bottle. Since yourself and Barbarossa, they could previously say, okay, these guys are just ranting about women. They haven't, they can't get laid. But if they start looking at, which I'm sure they have been, if they look at some of the content, like these seminal points that have stuck as foundational topics in MGTOW, like hypergamy, male mother need, all these really seminal foundational topics that coalesce everything together and give guys a kind of a clearer picture and a direction. It's not kind of scattershot. It all kind of forms this foundation. There's so much now over the years that has actually been talked over and over again and clarified and talked at different angles. And I think when they start to look at these things, say for instance like Briefo's Law, for instance, if they listen to your video or Barbarossa's or other people that have really thought about them and made really good, rational, logical videos coming at it from different points of view, they'll listen to those things and they'll go, I don't like it, but shit, how am I supposed to argue against this? It's been so, I don't like what he's saying, but I can't argue with them. So the only thing to do is silence. And so many guys have, say for instance, with Briefo's Law, talked about it so many times from different angles and given their point of view and massaged it and chipped away at it and refined it. But everyone's talked about that central topic so many times that it's inarguable almost. And there's a lot of MGTOW topics that are like that now. And if they look at this vast library of stuff, especially yours and Barbarossa's, how are they supposed to argue against it? And I suppose the censorship is the only thing to do, be quiet, don't talk about it.
And they're within their rights. YouTube is not a charity, it's a company. Quote one of my subscribers, and someone I'm subscribed to is actually much bigger than me, Zach Ron. Repeat after me, companies are not your friend. But yeah, I just can't play the contortionist game when it comes to language. It's just not... well, the one thing I don't like about companies is the central thing I don't like about what many women do is what they promise and what they speak about, and they pontificate these, high principles and great virtues about like, oh, we're honest and we're all for freedom of speech, and they act the fucking opposite. That's the thing I really dislike. At least be honest about it. Say, if there's things we don't like, we'll do X, Y, and Z. We're very upfront about things. We're politically correct, but don't try and
ride both sides
Well,
of the
I think you're
fence.
touching upon a very unique and specific issue here, namely that those things which have been codified and understood to be politically correct, nobody wants to willingly take on that label for his or herself, because, well, it's kind of rather himself, because it carries with it. It smacks of something negative. It's almost it almost stinks in some way. So yes, of course they're advocating the politically correct, but none of it. Notice how no SJW, who is an actual SJW, says, "Oh, I'm a social justice warrior." It's a term used by their quote unquote enemies. It's a derogatory term. It's negative. It's pejorative. And they don't. And I also think they don't. I obviously and other people we look at political correctness as a blight, a sickness, but they don't look at it that way. They look at it as something good, and so they're not going to call it political correctness. The term is tainted because people who are oppositional to it, such as myself and others, I don't speak highly of political correctness, as do very few people in my circles. They look at it as just a completely different spectrum, so they're never going to use that terminology. They're not going to say, "Hey guys, we're politically correct." When they say we want a safe place where people can speak their minds, that actually has a completely different meaning to them than, well, first off, I don't necessarily want a safe place, but a place where you can speak to what you or I or somebody else might desire. So it's very rare that people take on the language of their, I guess you say ideological enemies, if you want to call them that, because that imbues that language with a power. They say, well, we at Google and YouTube are politically correct. We don't like the following topics, and as long as you don't trespass on those topics, we're gonna get along peachy keen, and we'll all be best buddies here. They're simply not going to do that.
Yeah. Like I said, but I'd appreciate it if people are honest with me and not say, in effect, we're free and open and we respect all these points of view when in fact they don't. I know that's the way marketing works, and that's the way politics by dint of the word is trying to keep happy both sides of the fence while not really believing everything you say. Mouth certain platitudes to get the most votes, the most money, the most whatever. It's a very business-minded thing. I get it. But when one thing that rubs me the wrong way, whether it's politics, money, sales, marketing, and I've worked in that industry, marketing and design for most of my career, is how blatantly they're hypocritical, and they don't blink an eye. They don't even realise how they are, and any ends justify any means. So yeah, look, I know what you're saying.
Only goal. What do you expect?
Yeah. It's kind of like even if it's illegal, what's going to be the penalty? If the potential to make money is going to be greater than the fine, then I'll just take the risk.
Yeah, and I mean, so anything goes. And although, I mean, the strange thing about something, I mean, this has been talked about in some circles. I don't think I've talked about it too much. Is that the seeming paradox in operation here between an entity like Google or YouTube, and they're basically the same, and the normal, I guess you could call it the greedy businessman or the greedy company. The greedy company doesn't really have an ideological foundation necessarily beyond their own profit margins, and so they will employ whatever tools are necessary. But it's obvious, I think, particularly in light of the memo that was released by the now famous young man James Damore, or infamous, that's a better way of putting it, that, of course, Google is ideologically driven. Of course they want profit, but they will allow themselves, they will curtail that profit for themselves if the profit somehow trespasses upon their cherished beliefs. And that is something that is, I think, relatively new, because historically companies were always just about making money, even if they did have to run over the poor man in the process and cheat and swindle people out of their shekels or whatever. it's and this is a reasonably recent phenomenon, I would say, at least in light of previous decades, where Coca-Cola, they will claim to adhere to some ideology, but ultimately Coca-Cola is about making money for Coca-Cola, and they will hire quote unquote scientists that tell you that high fructose corn syrup is great for you for some bizarre reason, and it just doesn't really matter. But it's not because they believe in some religion that of high fructose corn syrup being amazing. It's just because that's how they're going to keep on making money. But Google has gone. It's strange, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's kind of a bit unsettling because they're the only big game in town. Everyone, even in terminology in movies these days, you watch, it's Google this, Google that. People's thinking, their knee-jerk reaction to knowing anything is Google it. And so if
Indeed.
Google is politically correct, is very left-leaning, that's really disconcerting for any kind of intellectualism. Because what you said before about Maslow's hierarchy, I think I did a video a while ago about how the system tries to keep you below or at that first level of, survival, shelter.
Well, I talk
food.
about that in the video that I plan on publishing, but yes, I agree.
Yeah, and so if now the biggest purveyor of what knowledge is and how people think, if I want to know anything, I Google everything because I'm so stupid. If they're actually telling you what to think and what words should be coming out of your mouth because of what they feed you in their search engine, that's really disconcerting. It's this. I find it really unsettling in terms of like this death of expansive knowledge and imagination and expanding thought. It's almost I can't remember what movie I was watching where they said this really great line where they said history is gone, history is always now. It's forever now. They don't want to everything old is passé. This is patriarchal, the past. This is offensive. You can't say this word anymore. All that matters is now, and all that matters now is how I feel. And so that coupled with Google being the sole arbiter of what you say and think, what is correct, that's really disconcerting.
But I think it ties in almost directly to what I was saying just prior, namely that the uniqueness of being able to bypass the desire for profit as a sole motive in the form of business and tippy-toe around that by throwing in ideological wedges. Well, I think it has everything to do with the fact that they are the monopoly and the sole proprietor of looking for terms and just about everything that exists on the ecosystem we call the internet. Now, I think it's very likely that were competitors to spring to life, and it's so difficult, but let's just say, give a hypothetical, 2 or 3 new companies pop up, they're serious competitors, and they're not playing the PC game. They're Coca-Cola, basically. And they see, well, it's not to say they wouldn't stab you in the back later because it might, counter their profit margin, but say, oh, well, there's this niche of, red pill, black pill people talking, and, if we can capture them, might be a good startup. And so if you play a game where you're rigging yourself by ideological constraints, but somebody else is just running the Coca-Cola software, I think, in theory at least, you will lose out to the Coca-Cola software package because Coca-Cola just doesn't care about being. I mean, yes, they will pay lip service, but ultimately, if they see they're making a profit, they won't really give a fuck. And that's the problem. Getting back, that they're a monopoly and they don't have competitors, and that's why they are allowed to engage in this very strange form of business where profit isn't everything, it's just part of the picture.
Yeah. It's almost like when it's so ideological, if your company's so big like Google or Coca-Cola, it's that it becomes kind of an animal you need to keep alive, and everyone's jobs are at stake by not letting it die. And it's this frantic, almost like it's almost like not letting a loved one die, like your father or mother. Like any ends will justify the means. So,
You just described the American war on drugs, by the way. mean, people often, it seems irrelevant and tangential, but it's not. I mean, nobody in his right mind argues for the efficacy of the war on drugs as a means of halting drug use, possession of drugs, etc. We know prohibition is bad and it doesn't work, but people just go through the motions. Why? Because there are, in all likelihood, millions of bureaucratic jobs on the line, and nobody wants to pull the plug on that because then people will be unemployed. And so, when Nixon started, his war on drugs in the 70s, there might have been ideological motivations behind it. But at some point in time, when something fails, as the drug war has done, it's also reminds me of Soviet history, where certainly by the 70s and 80s, the Soviet apparatchiks who were spouting the communist stuff, no one believed in that stuff, but they had to at least run the official adverts, and the official adverts were, well, communism is great, the drug war is effective, we need to stop drugs from on the street, and I wonder if that will. I think it's, given historical trajectories, that probably will be a fate that meets or is met by Google, because as evidence amounts throughout the internet concerning a wide variety of red pill topics, whether it comes political, racial, sex-based, whatever, they will not have good scientific counters anymore, and so they'll just spout the lines for the sake of spouting the lines. I think they're already kind of in that almost purgatorial state where a lot of that's the case. But we just need a legitimate competitor that, frankly speaking, operates on the Coca-Cola profit motivation. That does not give it, and of course there are risks there too. I mean, the risks are pretty much the same. I mean, like I said, Coca-Cola will hire, scare quotes, scientists to talk about the joys of high fructose corn syrup. Everyone knows by now that's not good for you, but who cares? I'm not saying that the Coca-Cola is more honest, and profit companies in their traditional form and shape, only driven by profit, will cut corners and cheat people if need be, and sometimes they need to be taken to task on that. The only way to get Google out of that corner where they're welding this ideology to their company practices is to find somewhere some legitimate market competition, which doesn't exist. And this is something that, in light of my recent video, go to Minds. Yeah, I am on Minds, by the way, although I don't really. The problem with Minds, I mean, I want to use this as a platform because we're talking about these events, talking about sort of competitive online platforms. I've been on Minds a bit. I've checked it out. Minds appears to me, by what I've seen, and this is only my opinion based on what I've seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, to be a kind of glorified alternative Facebook or Facebook 2.0. You post things there, people like your comments, you might engage in a sort of a comment section. The format is very similar to what I think I see in Facebook. It is not, based on what I've seen, a good replication of YouTube by any means. Some other alternatives, but that is my thoughts on Minds, because that's what I've explored a bit. And I'm just thinking, well, if there are alternatives, they're not competitive, at least in the same format or shape.
Yeah. And it goes back to what I was suggesting when they're implying, even by the name of their website, Minds, and they advocate that, this is freedom of speech. It's kind of one of their driving mottos, which a lot of more intellectually based videos from YouTube started to migrate to, and they've been getting larger. I know, I can't remember the exact details, but I remember TFM was recently saying that he stopped putting his content on Minds because even they had pressure, and they've had pressure from advertisers and big corporate entities to sort of toe the line in certain ways. So they've already been stopped in certain ways. So it's and they were the big answer to YouTube, and they even they're touting themselves not just with the name of their website, but their catchphrase is wanting people. It's freedom of speech. That's their big driving motto. And in terms of, I think on one or two videos I've seen, they've said in terms of Google, there's been an exponential growth in the search engine DuckDuckGo in the last few months because of all of this stuff that's come out of Google and the sacking of that engineer. So
interesting.
People have actually gone over to DuckDuckGo. I have as well, and that's grown ballistically. I hate to use that word, but it's grown so much in such a very short amount of time because the people that really care and have had enough of not only all the kind of connected topics, whether it's migration, the curtailing of civil liberties, censorship of language, just this childish constriction of intellect and the adult mind and freedom. People are really having enough, and given the chance, they will migrate. But what's interesting is that as quickly as people are migrating to these places, governments, with the push of Google, of large corporations, are really curtailing these other places people can go really quickly now. So I think that's going to be the challenge because, people's theory was, well, if, an entity gets too big like Google or YouTube and they're the monopoly, people vote with their wallet or, with their content and they'll just move. You lose people that you don't treat well. But then when a company wants to actually stand on those values and virtues, someone comes in and ruins them from a business point of view because let's face it, everything relies on the monetary and financial system, and if they kind of they can shut you off legally through government and through the government, what can you do? They might have the best intentions, but when the government's stepping on your neck.
This isn't the first time. I think we can actually look for precedents in the 20th century. And, of course, telecommunications or any kind of broadcasting communication, it's a recent phenomenon in human history. But certainly when radio existed and was the only means of getting out mass messages, there were, depending on the country and the region, there were vested interests vying to take control of a certain narrative and present that narrative versus another. I think the history of telecommunications, and this is the latest incarnation, in many ways is a reflection of what human beings will naturally try to do. People try to control things. People want power for reasons, resources, and then there are male dominance hierarchies involved in this too. But the point is, people want power, and so I don't really. There is historical precedent for this, and there's also historical precedent for government collusion. I mean, it's obvious. Just look at the 20th century. It's interesting that.
But what automatically comes to mind as what you just said is when the monetary system becomes religion, right, and you start to curtail and try and shape people. There's nothing to desire. Say previously when they used to revere novelists, say in the 50s, 60s and 70s, like they, even now, people who haven't read a book know who Dostoevsky and Tolstoy are by name. And like they haven't even read them, but there's this intellectual cachet. They're kind of like celebrities from the past. But back then, people like Norman Mailer, people were interested in the space race, science. Albert Einstein was a celebrity. There was a high degree of intellect being put on a platform, and so people would aspire to sort of be driven by that. But if now you're trying to manufacture and curtail and censor intellect and progress, really. It's fundamentally progress, people's free will to progress ideas in society, because these things were progressed by innovation and creativity by saying, well, get out of your way and go for it, and you'll be rewarded for your own personal drive to follow whatever you're passionate about. And we will provide the edifices for you to do that. But now where they're chopping off these edifices and saying, no, you're not even starting. We just want to make money. then society, there's no more progress. There's no more ideas. And you've mentioned it before. All you're getting is a shiny iPhone. The airplane hasn't changed design in over 50 or 60 years.
We're getting into complicated territory, but it's worth covering.
But in terms of censorships, that's what it's doing, and they're forever scratching their head, going, "Oh, what's the problem with women aren't getting married, or technology, or progress?" While at the same time cutting progress at the knees before it even takes a step with censorship.
The Cold War cannot be understated. It was an enormously motivating, powerful driving factor in pushing certain narratives. And there was a science narrative. The United States imported many scientists from Europe, and as well as their own scientists who engage in nuclear research and subsequently produce an atomic bomb. And there was a kind of celebrity like that, because it was in the political interest of the country to promote certain scientists to an almost celebrity-like status, because there was that ideological tug of war. And Colton made a video about this eons ago in greater depth, but war, conflict can drive innovation. Without an overt enemy to oppose, without someone that you can demonize, I'm not saying that communism was great, but it's saying the Reds, whatever. It's hard to have a platform for this type of thing. As for controlling narratives, I think it's government. A great example of this is the distinction between different wars that the United States had taken part in during the 20th century. The Vietnam War was, for a variety of reasons, unprecedented, but it was unprecedented, I think, in many ways, because there were a lot of amateurish journalists, boots on the ground, filming things and showing things, atrocities and violence and just the insanity of the time. Not a whole lot going on with regards to that in the Korean War, World War II, subsequent conflicts. In fact, I think there's a general consensus when I've read that because this relates to media and television or radio, when the Vietnam War ended, the greatest lesson that the United States learned, the government, was to disallow for open journalistic coverage of such events. So I remember, well, I mean, you and I are both somewhat ancient, and of course you were in platypus land, but you might remember Operation Desert Storm, 1990s, right? Saddam had acted up, and Big Daddy Bush was taking him to task, right? And I remember these editions, I think it was Time magazine or what have you, it was almost farcical, our arsenal versus theirs, and this list of cool weapons and tanks and jet fighters, and the news coverage was corny to comical, or if not both, and you'd see these big flashing explosions. You didn't see limbs, there was no My Lai massacre on display. So I think they learned that lesson, and so government collusion, it seems like we're drifting far away from the topic. We're not, I think, is an inherent part of telecommunications. It was just a matter of time. I was talking to Coltrane about this earlier, that there might have been some golden period, I'm not necessarily talking about MGTOW, but on YouTube, where people could just speak their minds. But it was merely a matter of time until some type of clamp came down to shut those minds up wanting to speak. And I would say that inasmuch as Minds.com could ever be some kind of replicator of the YouTube format and style, they too would be subject to the same pressures, even if they didn't want to buckle and kowtow. They would, I guess, as TFM has mentioned, I don't really watch TFM, so I wouldn't know, but they would buckle and kowtow, and I think it's best case scenario. You end up with a kind of almost a never-ending migratory pattern of with the internet, this platform has failed us. We'll move to the next one. Let's give this a 2 to 3 year run. Okay, third year's up. It looks like they're transforming too, and you just keep on moving. The problem
the trend looks like the strategy they use now is fragment any any platform that gets too big into a million different ones, so it stays at a smaller level, rather than, MGTOW on YouTube is booming, and how do we curtail that? Now the strategy is like we'll again cut it off at the knees as it takes its first steps, and people have to diversify, almost like in the monetary system where you diversify your funds, because you don't want to take the risk of one investment going sour. And so, for your own sake, if you want to keep any kind of health in your video production and the message, you have to fragment it in a million different directions. But unfortunately, none of those different fragmented platforms or websites ever gets too big. But the funny thing happens is that, how do people find you when you're all over the place? And who has the time? If I have to constantly update 10 or 12 different websites, I barely have the time to update YouTube. And people tend to come to, say, YouTube and message me. And if I can't check all the messages. If I have to fragment myself in 10 different directions, I'm less responsive and less communicative with my audience. I have less of a connection with people like yourself and other people. People would say, oh, well, I've messaged Stardust or Human. He hasn't got back to me. Stuff him, and I'll just get on to the next thing. This fragmenting of information and minds, and in a way, weakening the bonds between individuals that could sort of, that has until now, made certain people in MGTOW kind of band together in one kind of uniform manner. It's this kind of really, it's a weird way I can see it actually diluting people that will try and coalesce these, because you've talked about it as well, where and Barbarossa has too, where this is each of us providing sort of information into a large library. And I think one of Barbarossa's videos, I can't remember what the title was, but he was talking about the history of language, and how that was the first computer was thought and speech, and actually writing something down to communicate, and how censorship is actually limiting speech in that way and communication between people. Yeah, it's just all you can do is read the terrain and try and dodge it. I mean, what can you do?
You can't. Well, the point is, you can't dodge it. And even this was my original point at the beginning of this discussion, that attempts to dodge it, engaging in this hopping about on one foot, as I put it, this contortionist speech pattern, it won't. We don't even know how it works exactly, and you can't really avoid it. I think you can pay the penalty, as many of us have done, and try to weather the storm. Once again, I'll thank my subscribers. A lot of them stepped up to the plate, and our patrons or donate. That's really appreciated. But ultimately, I don't think you can, as an individual or even as a group, can fight forces as large and powerful as these corporate interests. Now, the other point I want to make is that as much as some people, actually not everyone claims this, but I don't think most people are willing to come out and say, I want a platform with just open discussion about anything, right? About anything. Most people want to present a spin or present a narrative, and ideally, they would want that narrative to be the primary narrative for listeners out there. So you have a lot of fractious groups on YouTube who, but if they were in power, for example, I've said this, people call me alt-right, I don't know why, but if the alt-right, through some miracle, attained tremendous power, they would be playing the censorship game too. I'm almost certain of it. So it's you're not going to get a lot of people, or even maybe, I mean, it sounds odd, but MGTOW, I don't think you're going to get any group of people, individuals, yes, but groups will say, well, yeah, we just want an open platform where all ideas are discussed. That's going to happen. And so that's the fatal flaw, I think, to any sort of human endeavor, is because each group collectively, and even the individuals that comprise the group, are looking for power and influence and authority. So
They are, although one thing I like about a lot of the MGTOW content that I watch, the people that I talk to, like yourself, is that those kind of men who are going their own way have a more of a scientific individualist bent than a group bent, where as a scientific, in terms of a scientifically leaning mind, you're not beholden to an ideology or a group, where if you say, oh, well, we discuss an idea and you make me think or sharpen my point of view, I'm not beholden to the ideology as much. And that's one thing I tend to see MGTOW guys who are speaking more intellectual, they're open to adjustment and sharpening their ideas. So in that case, the ideology isn't as stable. I mean,
yeah, but that's why I have no problem with using the MGTOW label or not. I don't really care. There are plenty of people that, in the most recent video, I talked about these sort of thirsty guys throwing money at women. Oh, MGTOW content. I don't need that label for myself. But once again, I'm a lone individual, and so that's the problem, that you will get instances of individuals who do that. So let's just have an open discussion of ideas, but ultimately, most people are just going to play a power game, or are looking to, in as much as they're a minority. This is, I think, historically borne out. Yeah, I mean, we've seen certain groups of people in history use minority status for a variety of reasons to complain about things and then to affect change. And once the change is in place, they become, I think this is effectively what's happened in our society, they become the wielders of power and the masters of censorship. And the iterations prior to that, it was some other group in charge that it was looking to control the narrative. The lone individual, unfortunately, is weak. But yeah, I for my own part, I can't really not be that person. I'm just sort of, that's just how I'm constituted. But I think that's the issue at hand. One of the big issues at hand, because, as I said, anytime even if there should be at some point in time a legitimate alternative, in just a matter of a few short years, people will be talking about, oh, the good old days of Platform X, and then looking for something else. Because the whole reason why echo chambers exist is because people want to control a narrative, and they might actually view, correctly or incorrectly, that the world such that maybe their narrative is better than person X's narrative. Maybe they might even be right. I don't know. It really would depend. But I think true individualism, which is shunned by the vast majority of people, including the people who spout on and talk. Notice I don't really spend a lot of time talking about, oh, you're being individual, but that's an ideology. I mean, individualism as an ideology is something that I say Sargon does really well. Only care about, but he has a platform, and he has a set of beliefs that. See, I just try to speak my mind. I'm not saying I'm special or unique because of that, but if I'm an individual because of that's fine. It's my preference for living that way that marks me as an individual, not because I'm preaching a philosophy of individuation necessarily. And I think that's the difference there. And it's very difficult to survive in an atmosphere like that when most people aren't like me. I think that's also, I mean, it's not the only reason. One of the reasons why Barbarossa left YouTube years ago, now years ago, because, yeah, there's always some risk that groupthink takes over and things become very rigid and inflexible, and all you're left doing is conforming to some mantra. I've mentioned this before, like the preacher who's preaching his theology long after he's discarded it, right? I mean, this is not uncommon.
Well, a lot of that ties back to being beholden to money and the business model and all that kind of stuff we talked about before.
Because that preacher has done his job for 20 years, has 2 kids, maybe a dog, a wife. If he says, well, I don't believe in this hogwash anymore, what's he going to do? He's not exactly qualified for other things. So he better be preaching the Gospels, because that's, he's like the the government employee that is essentially not wasting his time in some sense, but wasting his time sifting through bags of marijuana in some state where it's not approved because of a drug war.
Well, I did one of the very first videos I did that kind of got me known through Cotery's channel. Thanks, Cotery. It was you love what you invest in, and these kind of people that invest their lives, whether you're a priest, whether you're a business person, you've built up a business. They're very, whether that's conscious or not, they're very anti truth and honesty and being able to kind of sharpen ideas and address them and look at them in under a new light. Because if you've spent your whole life, a very basic one is if you have children and you're married, I'm sure yourself and a lot of guys and a lot of friends that I have from high school, they love their family, and I can understand it. They've invested a lot, and it's what they live and breathe for. There's no chance that they're going to cross into open thinking in every regard. There's always completely locked doors that they just don't want to talk about. And these are some very smart and intelligent men, but certain doors have been locked by them because they know that they will lose everything that gets them up in the morning and that has them living in some sort of purposeful routine. If you're completely intellectually honest, and you've talked about this in many, many videos and how it's related to sort of, the malaise of men and being completely intellectually honest. And unfortunately, like people like myself and yourself to a greater degree, is so unable to kind of be any other way that these men can't. So let alone a company who's beholden to keeping the animal of the company alive at any cost, they cannot look at honesty. All they can do is falsely talk about honesty to get your money. But when the rubber hits the road, anything that keeps the animal or the business alive will be the mantra that they espouse. Anything that keeps a man who's married and his family alive will be the thing that the platitudes he speaks. And he'll use word salad to convince you and himself, or he'll want to change the topic. So you really, unless if you're more leaning to have this a scratch that needs to be intellectually itched, like yourself and myself, where there's only so much you can fool yourself or not go down that road. And unfortunately, too much of society is just run by the monetary system where, truth be damned, and unfortunately, how are they now going to balance progress? And because a lot of the previous generation's progress to the 60s and 70s and 80s was due to a lot of intellectual truth and pursuit and creativity and honesty, and the gates were wide open. And when you close that, but you still want all the money that came from that,
I'll
what are you going to do?
respectfully disagree a little bit there, because as I pointed out, I think, what happened in the 50s, 60s, 70s, etc., I think this was just one faction of people, various people, pushing a certain narrative. Now, because they were the underclass at the time, effectively, because they were the underdog is a better way of putting it. Yeah, they wanted freedom of speech and yada, yada, yada. And the minute they got into power and started pushing their agenda, things changed. And they have become the speech policemen that we know today.
Yeah.
And the people who, these days, who might have represented what they saw at the time as adversaries, had now become the quote-unquote champions of free speech. It's always just a matter of, it's a pendulum in some sense, because, like I said, each group has vested interests that are ideologically rigid and bound to some abstract set of principles. Some of them are better followed than others, but there was some creativity there, and there were some ideas, but I just think that those groups of people that were playing those games were playing power games, and they were it was expedient at the time to talk about free speech and freedom of expression and exploration of ideas, and when it ceases to be expedient, it ceases to be expedient, and then they just move on to the next tactic. This is why I just see, left-right politics as it's just a pendulum that goes back and forth, because ultimately they're all at the game of control and controlling some type of narrative. Now, it just so happens, in the current state of affairs, that the narrative that we're told is a narrative that I find very disagreeable and prevents many of the topics that I would like to see researched and investigated, so it becomes a type of broader knowledge. And additionally, we know more about them. Well, this type of investigation is prevented. So, of course, I have opposition to that. But let's say there was, like I said, some right-leaning apparatus in power that said, well, that's all cool, but these ideas aren't warranted. Well, I would have to express opposition to that too. And so I just left, right. It's well, it's a bit like Janus, right? It's Janus, the two-faced god. Anyway.
Oh yeah. But do you think a lot of it has to do with you've talked about this, where everyone, biologically speaking, everyone wants to reproduce, and if you have the gun of gynocentrism at the head of every family man and woman saying you better operate this way, then no matter how intellectually curious and honest you want to be and progress yourself and your life and society forward, that's the ceiling, because everyone wants to have kids virtually.
Well, right. I mean, we're effectively talking about a kind of evolutionary spandrel here. And I think a spandrel is a legitimate category. A lot of people are still skeptical, but they're obviously unintended offshoots. For those of you who don't know what a spandrel is, something that's not directly linked to a specific reproductive function, but then turns out to be something rather big. People have proposed human language to be such a spandrel. But in any event, yeah, I do think, because in some sense, there are all kinds of alliances that are formed. I mean, the most common one is sort of racial or ethnic. That's sort of the very meat and bones tribal identity. But there's also religious identity, and then there's political identity. I think most of the identitarianism you see on offer today is political in nature. And I do think that, in some sense, trying to control a narrative in a very metaphorical sense, very sort of removed from the original intent, yeah, you're controlling a narrative, and so your type will be allowed to produce artificially, in this case, sort of in the ether. So there's definitely that, because ultimately control of resources goes back to these basic needs. YouTube, the internet is a resource, and a group will try to seize control of it. All history really is, when you look at comes down to it, is various types of group conflict. And I don't disagree with that. I think it's a kind of a spandrel effect.
Yeah, I was just making the point that for people like you and I, where we have very little interest in reproduction and marriage, it's a lot easier for us to be intellectually honest and speak the truth, be damned, and and not be afraid of ideas and not be threatened if someone. Whereas the person who has a family and children doesn't even want to step foot in the ring of complete honesty, because it might make him face what he may need to let go of, what has been a lie. So all I'm saying is that because everyone wants to reproduce, you have the effect of, everyone's nodding their head now saying, oh yeah, because of the children and because women are being made to feel bad about things, we should censor these things. Children don't deserve to see this. It's not what you said, it's how you said it. It's this kind of like making everything palatable for children and women, which seems analogous these days, the two. And it's because of this reproductively inclined, everyone wants to have a family and, make women nod and make women happy. But if you don't have that in you, like say you and I tend not to, those kind of people tend to be more honest about things and will progress ideas. But, that doesn't make a difference to...
I wholly agree, and I don't want to spoil the content of a forthcoming video I've begun scripting, but I'll have the actual quote in the video, but it's very revealing. Recently, Jordan Peterson was talking to Camille Paglia, the well-known self-professed transsexual feminist, but a different sort. Anyway, he basically conceded in that video, and I will fully take this apart in my forthcoming video, but that he doesn't know how to stand up to women. Now, that's a paraphrase, but it's essentially what he said.
Yeah.
If you don't want something from somebody, yeah, it's easy to say no. I mean, we were talking earlier, the audience, looking rather intensely for a new place, and one of the obstacles I found is that I'm not, as I refer to, a Prussian office cubicle worker. I don't have a standard job, and so people, despite reliable testimony from multiple sources, as to my solvency and my reliability, people reject my applications for different places to live. Now, I have a vested interest when I approach someone, when I notice this tendency, this trend to, and even in this case, to say, well, to not say, you're biased because of X, because it will screw over my chances. Now, I think that, applied to women, and getting back to that thing, I don't have a vested interest in, I mean, people accuse me otherwise. They just don't really know me, and they haven't followed me for long enough. I'm not trying to appeal to, I'm not really trying to appeal to anyone, and I usually let the chips fall as they may, but I'm certainly not trying to appeal to women. And so I feel relatively free in what I may or may not say about women. Even in real life contexts, I've run up into trouble. I remember when I was much younger, in my 20s, being a kind of black sheep, not red pilled by any means, still very much lilac pilled, purpley. Who knows how you want to term it. Pointing out the bad behavior of women and getting frowns of opprobrium and furrowed brows and what, yeah, but that's what she did. It really sucks. And then saying, that seems to be a recurrent pattern. I can't, at the moment at least, years later I would be able to, I can't necessarily assign pattern A to B and create the necessary but congruous collage out of it, but this is something that I've observed over and over, and I would make these observations even then to my detriment, because I faced social opprobrium and disapproval, and you just hate women. Even then, you just hate women and yada yada. But I kind of have a relatively long track record of not making for polite company, and I do think that's just a personality trait that I have, which doesn't really help me in the real world very much, unfortunately.
Well, what strikes me is that if you're intellectually honest, you want to talk about all sides and approach the topic from various angles to get a clear overall picture. And if you're not allowed to cast women as a villain when they are in fact a villain, and if 1 + 1 = 2, and one of those ones is women as the villain, then you can't actually get to the honest number 2, which is the answer. And in terms of your office,
what Peterson suffers from, by the way.
He's a he's a smart guy, but he's fighting against that sort of vested investment he's had into being a traditionalist. He obviously loves his family and his wife and everything, and through all his kind of word salad and circus performing of
the archetype. That's the devouring mother. That's the devouring mother. How many dragons have you slain today? Have you slain enough dragons?
Yeah. And, citing all these great philosophers and making a really good case against things biologically, still doesn't kind of, when you pose to him, okay, all of this stuff may be true and it may work, but why should a man do this if there's 80% chance that he will fail? Oh, well, you just need to do it, and you need to fight, and you need to be...
You need to do the right thing. And I've been advising men to take responsibility in today's... But,
yeah.
I mean, but I don't know what to do. I don't know how to stand up to a crazy woman. I just don't know. It's got to be the sisters who do it.
Yeah.
I liked Peterson a lot, but, yeah.
But the right thing by who? When you start to say, well, what about the right thing by me? and then they laugh and they tell you to man up, which is essentially what it is. And you can get someone like Peterson, who is an intelligent guy by IQ standards, being able to use great words and reasonable thinking and reference a lot of philosophers and a lot of his own intellect. But because he's beholden to the traditionalist side, he can kind of use sophistry to convince everyone. And it's not hard looking at the mindset of university
that man is
graduates.
beholden to many sides, I should say. But yeah, I mean, he's the best you can get from a mainstream platform, I would say, and he has some interesting ideas. I think the whole archetype thing is interesting and even accurate to some degree. But yeah, I mean, he's a perfect example of somebody who will not cross the banks of the river the other side because he just can't go there. And this concerns multiple topics. But
before we change topics, I just want to touch on one thing before I forget. In terms of people who can think more scientifically or individually, or not be beholden to things that they just feel and they don't want to address. I still like Jordan Peterson, depending on what he talks about.
Yeah,
I still love and respect Stefan Molyneux when he talks about certain things. But
I cannot listen to that guy, the whispering and the thespian nonsense.
He does a similar thing when he gets onto traditionalism and his family and what he actually loves and how he feels about them. He does these gymnastics, but I like him. I like Jordan Peterson, but I can actually appreciate and cherry pick what makes sense. And
well, of course you can.
As much of as an individual, take what makes sense to me and readjust my point of view and learn from things that, both Peterson and him are really well versed in and can actually 1 + 1 does really equal a resounding 2 in what they say. But most people are.
That's the cauldron of life, is it not? I mean, like I said, I cannot countenance. Or even it's the whispering, the acting. I mean, he's great at theater.
I think it.
California, do you know? Really? I can't deal with that, so I don't listen to him at all. Even conversations he has with interesting public intellectuals and scientists, it's very difficult to sit through that. At least Peterson just uses his own Canadian Northwest accent and doesn't try to play the actor on stage. But yeah, I agree. But that's the cauldron of life. You take from the cauldron of life what is not just what is useful, but what interests you, what is true. And I know for myself, there are tons of people who listen to me who only like 30% of my content because, as it so happens, unplanned, mind you, 30% of my content fits some category, a group of categories that these people find interesting. And there will be other people only like 10%. And I have plenty of people that only like quote-unquote MGTOW content. And so when something comes out, they'll listen, they'll comment, or whatever. That's just how things work in general. There's nobody... It's rare, I think, that anyone represents a uniformity of interest for any given individual and that they'll pay attention to that. But yeah, I agree. I like a lot of what Peterson has to say. But yeah, he is constrained, and I do think, as I'll say in my forthcoming video, that his passion can often lead to zealotry and different types of blindness. But having said all of that, your city, this city, the great city of Melbourne, increasingly we hear these, we've talked about this before, but in fact, I was just talking to Coltane, who's kind of been a bit AFK recently. I was asking what's going on with him. And he was just saying he can't even stomach the internet anymore because he goes on Facebook and it's just each side is specifically in Australia is sort of tugging at each other and it's just insufferable.
Oh, it's a madhouse. Is he actually I haven't spoken to him about that topic in terms of social media, but does he frequent social media daily or?
I know he has a Facebook page that he checks out, and he'll open up a website, and everywhere is everywhere you have the sort of the signalers and the virtue signalers, and when I actually venture out of my forest to the forest down under just to check out some of the rhetoric. There's something so lopsided about Australia, and the epicenter, I hate to say, appears to be Melbourne.
Yay!
For all the great
win.
Climate, yeah, for all the fantastic weather there, and the quality of life, because Melbourne seems to always be fitted into top 3, top 5 best cities to live in the world. One wonders what the standard is, and whether or not political considerations are taken into account, but neither here nor there. There's something about Melbourne, almost unique, not uniquely, but in terms of scale and degree, that you don't find in many places. Now, what would differentiate Perth from Melbourne is, of course, Perth is very businessy and thus very conservative, and you're not going to get a lot of
Sydney is that way too, more so.
More so, because
business.
It's a financial capital. Yep. Whereas Melbourne, my impression, is sort of hipsterville. Fancy drinks. There's a really kind of a YouTube couple, which is sort of unique because I think she's Nigerian and he's an Australian, and their entire channel, millions of views, about lifestyle in Melbourne, and very odd. But
well, it is. It's very hipster. I think I mentioned to you, I think the main reason why Melbourne is the epicenter of gynocentric feminism and all this political correctness, and I've made a video where last year or early this year we changed the little walk sign in the city from a male to a female, and it's on the front page of
that really happened, eh?
That really happened. I don't know how much money we spent, although to be fair, I don't think it was taxpayer money. It was the council's money in some kind of way. I don't know if that's true,
okay.
But and it's just very, very feminist. The universities, the main universities here that always have the spotlight and that the main newspapers cite and who have people writing op-eds and commentary pieces for them are all, very feminist inspired, or if they don't say so, you just do a quick, dare I say, Google search for them and you find out that they're lecturers in gender studies and these kind of diversity studies programs. So I think the thing that that makes it the epicenter is that Melbourne is the most multicultural city in Australia. I'd be confident to say by far, not by a narrow degree. And it was evident today. Today was a beautiful day. And I was out with friends and the coffee shops, the variety of restaurants you can go to, the different places. And I think that's where
the restaurants,
the hipsterville kind of element that you're speaking of. There's this big culture of, the beard culture, as in, guys like with beards now, and the lumberjack look has come back, and we do some of the best coffees here, and there's a lot of
so
art.
Gay.
All this, it's kind of like, and they're skinny guys with tattoos and big beards who talk like David Beckham. It's just, there's this multicultural smorgasbord of restaurants and things to spend money on and just laze around with your girlfriend and just waste your time and energy on. None of them intellectual, a lot of them artistic, because I notice a lot of people on, whether it's Instagram, there's a lot of cafes and restaurants that connect with Instagram, and you take a photo of your food and you hashtag this and you load it up and you form a community, and there's this sense of belonging through social media when you connect to these different types of cafes and restaurants and Mexican delicacies, and there's this little laneway where they serve Spanish food, and there's this kind of whole multicultural arms around each other kind of hipster culture, and we do great coffee, and so it's this middle to bourgeois class and university privilege. It's not really the working class, it's the middle to bourgeois university class that is pushing Melbourne and making it what it is, as far as I can see. So there's a lot of multicultural and diverse entertainment and ways to have coffee and spend time with your friends.
Ways to have coffee.
Ways to have coffee, sit in the park and, get out your moleskin notebook and do little sketches and post a selfie and all that kind of pretentious
and drink
culture.
Your watermelon latte at the same time.
Yeah, your pumpkin spice latte, and being able to kind of jerk off, intellectually jerk off, but actually say nothing. And that's enough. and people do it with their posts. And it's very momentary, and people think they've accomplished something because they've got a big following on Facebook or Instagram, or they've gone to this place and they take today I was commenting with my friends that, we went had breakfast in one place and then later on had a coffee somewhere else. And
was it called Tiffany's, by the way?
No, no, and all these places have really hipstery names, like the coffee shop's called Your Grandmother's Jacket. Things.
I was going to get something else. I was going to say the Fox's Paw or some ridiculous.
Just some bullshit. It harkens
that would be
back.
A sandwich place, maybe the Fox's Paw, organic pita bread and blah.
Yeah. It harkens back to the poetry that was being published back in the 60s with Charles Bukowski, where very few were doing authentic, introspective, honest stuff, but many people were using the right language to belong to those groups and be intellectual and have tenure at university as professors to teach poetry, but they really knew nothing. So there's this culture where everyone's an expert and everyone's now running their own business on Instagram, and everyone's a minor social sort of celebrity, and they're living the life, and they're almost like they're living a champagne life on a beer budget, but they think they're rich. It's this really weird. It's a great city to live in if you don't look very closely. But once you start talking to people, people are really stupid. They're really bereft of ideas, no literary acumen, no mental acuity, no original thought. You ask them, whatever you ask them about the world or their thoughts in general is whatever comes out of their mouth is newsprint, or whatever comes out of the mainstream TV. So, and if you say anything to the contrary, or even just question, say, well, I don't agree with that, and you want to have a lively debate, it's quickly cut off. The conversation's awkward. So a lot of the social interaction in Melbourne is cut off in the same way we're talking about censorship on the internet. It's cut off very even openly in the analog world. Socially, when you're in coffee shops, everyone's got these plastered smiles and drinking their coffee and taking selfies.
I fucking love it. Yeah.
It's just
I don't love it, but
it's just fake. And because there's sunshine, you put up with it. And I go back to my little hole in my studio and actually I'm honest here. And you can only incrementally be honest when you're in these places. But more so, like, I'm actually noticing the effect what these places have, because they're pretending to be intellectual. Sometimes what tends to happen with not a lot of them, not the majority, but few of them, because they pretend to be intellectual, they speak the language. Then I talk to a few people that start to be open intellectually. And I've noticed that's a really nice surprise.
Are you suggesting that they've taken off grandmother's jacket?
Yeah. So it's kind of like proudly putting on a MGTOW t-shirt because it's got some cachet, and you can beat your chest in a macho way. And then because you're in that and you like the initial blue pill phase and you're angry, all of a sudden you're privy to your videos, and you start to, a few things seep in. And you can actually, if you're that kind of personality, start to find richness in the truth. And I find that even in this bullshit, coffee, hipster, beard, tattoo culture of Melbourne, it's very youth orientated. Like, the market's very young. Even the
alleyways too, aren't there? I've seen these sort of alleyways where there's the coffee shop, your mother's pet basset hound or whatever.
Yeah.
Make that up, and there's these organic sandwiches and vegan, and these sort of alleyways that you just chill, and there's this little corner of this table where you play with your Me Phone. And
well, even the names of these coffee shops, what I mean about posturing intellectualism is they sound clever or witty, and that's the extent of it. They pat themselves on the back of being intellectual. So having a coffee shop called, Give Me Back My Book sounds really witty, and it's kind of, or Proust's cat, or something like that sounds like intellectually witty because you're saying the word Proust and
it's Proust, but anyway.
Proust, it shows you how intellectual I am. But I admit that. But
no worries there, mate.
Yeah. But also these alleyways, they're beautiful. There's a lot of antiquity and history, and they can't help being bereft of any present ideas. What I believe a lot of this, because the hipster culture in Melbourne's so big, that what the hipster culture is, if you look at it just on its surface affectations, is grasping onto the past because they're bereft of any modern ideas now. And whether it's beards and tattoos and beard oil and old sneakers from the 80s, like New Balance sneakers, and being poetry coming back, and art and alleyways and cool coffee shops that looks like a cool coffee shops that you used to have in the 80s. It's because they have nothing to offer now.
Do you know what what you're telling me reminds me of? I know I've mentioned this on my channel before. I used to have an English friend who, I think, was 15 years my senior, and he would tell me about how, at the time, how innovative it was in, say, in the 70s to romp about London with spike green hair and have tattoos, and it was sort of a daring act, because certainly at the time, at least, there was still a fair degree of social disapproval, and people didn't think that was the cool thing to do. But you're absolutely right. I've seen this in New York City. Everyone, whatever you think of tattoos or piercings or weird hair or beards or vintage shoe wear, people have just completely run out of ideas. They're not really smart enough to create their own, and there's safety in the herd, right? Because if not everybody's conforming to some hipster culture of beards, and is it really called My Grandmother's Jacket, by the way? Is that what you said?
Oh, I can't remember, but it was something stupid.
Well, okay. Well, then these sorts of things, it creates a smokescreen, and you're protected, and in a way that if you were a 70s punkster in London, you weren't. I mean, you were a freak, and everyone acknowledged. I mean, maybe you were going out of your way to be a freak, but you paid a price for that. You were going to get a job. You were looked at as a scum.
Yeah.
And what have you, and all. Well, I mean, creativity in general. I mean, you're an artist. You're a creative person.
Mm.
I forgot who it was. It was some particularly good channel. This guy called Thoughty had actually made a video about how music, the amount of notes involved in music these days, it's been decreasing. There is something real in a decrease, because we're both old fogies. Creativity moving into the 80s and 90s, and I have to say that when I try to think of some really important piece of music or art or really anything that has sort of pop status from the 2000s, I really struggle. I can't really. I struggle. I off the top of my head, I can't really think of very much. 90s is a lot easier. 80s is much easier. But when you're left with that type of paradigm, what's the only thing that is left from the leftovers is, well, leftovers, and so you just draw upon that, and you sculpt your world based on that. And yeah, I think in maybe Melbourne is an epicenter for this, but in many ways, human creativity, for the time being, not forever, has run its course, because so many things have been tried.
Yeah,
and
but also
there's also an ignorance. You're an artist of the classics. Picasso might have strewn about abstractions on canvas, but he was fully capable and had indeed produced works of classical proportion and art, and could appreciate that in a way that I think a lot of, in terms of art, specifically visual art, I see this lacking. They just in terms of knowledge and training, just not there.
Yeah, like I said before, they'll quote artists because it sounds cool, not because they necessarily learnt from them. In a similar way, I said before, well, people will quote Dostoevsky because it gives them some sort of intellectual cachet, but they haven't read it. Or they've just gone on Google and, top 10 quotes by Dostoevsky, and they'll, and then
Google is your friend.
Yeah. But, and admittedly, look, I've done the same thing. I haven't read it extensively on one person or another, but a quote of theirs, but I don't pretend to, I'll fully admit who I have read extensively and who I haven't.
I do the same. I've never completely gotten through Dostoevsky. I probably never will at this stage. There are other things I have completely gone through several times, such as Macbeth. Big fan of that, and various pieces by Shakespeare. I mean, increasingly, even I find myself, I just don't read nearly as much as I used to. The internet is a massive, vast distraction.
I just don't like reading on the internet that much, but
I don't like that either.
I'll be the first to put my hand up. I really can't read Tolstoy. I really find him difficult, and so I can quote some of his sayings. Very intelligent guy, but having to read one of his books where he takes 200 pages to describe a woman coming down the stairs is just like yawn inspiring. I just can't do it. He just he protracts his words so much and his plot, and it's just not for me. But anyway, I diverged from what we were talking about there.
That's fine.
But in terms of the culture here, I've noticed there's a lot I've noticed a lot of guys, they're getting more and more tattoos, acting more and more macho. It's almost like to compensate. And I see guys in cars, doing burnouts in their muscle cars, and I always laugh because I see it's the only way they can be lions in this gynocentric environment. It's the only way that they can safely be macho. They can't actually say anything intellectual, which is a real foundation of a big part of masculinity and intellect, on how we progress. And how
intellect is only appealing to women as much as it serves their interests. Let's be clear about that. Yeah,
and intellect these days challenges their interest. So the only way men can do it now is by just really these thin patina of affectations regarding like tattoos, beards. It's getting ridiculous. It's like the more lumberjack I can get, and the more cool and yet women like me, but I'm saying nothing. So it's a safe macho cardboard cutout that can't challenge anything women say. Women are the only intellectual voice, and the only way masculinity is allowed to exist in this hipster culture is just by visual affectation, not by anything you say. Anything these men says, again, like they never stray into being completely honest when you start talking about women. Sometimes when you get guys together, they will, but almost entirely, and this really pisses me off when I'm in a group of males and females, the conversation gets quite naturally onto, social science or men and women. And women will quite confidently talk from their point of view, really arrogantly, really forthrightly from a female dominating point of view. And the moment you even sort of suggest, how about my point of view? And it's not even, you're not even being confrontational. The next guy next to you goes, whoa, you're on your own there, human. And the men throw other men under the bus so quickly, yet this guy's got tattoos, he's got a beard, he looks really macho, and he just comes off as a pussy. And it's just really disheartening, just to see how the only way masculinity is allowed is the thin patina of the way that women allow it to be voiced, which is just by kind of look and visual, which is, women's fashion. Women like the fashion of things visually. And so men have become that kind of fashion. Not what they say, because women don't have much patience for sort of that intellectual spectrum of society. So they'll control that to a very tepid level. And men are only permitted to sort of be non-intellectual, but they can be as macho as they want to be, as long as they're traditional and they bend over and kiss women's asses. It's really sad to see all this kind of macho posturing, and getting back to, these cafe culture and leather aprons, these baristas making coffee with beards and leather aprons, and it's almost, the next step is then with whips and chains, serving a woman coffee in a sort of 50 Shades of Grey fashion.
Did this thing go through, by the way? Was this call for meant to pay more money for coffee or similar beverages?
Yeah, I think
that was in Melbourne, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think this was last time we were speaking. I can't remember if we published it, but I think we were talking about it before or after, or even with Coltane, where there was and it made prime time TV. It was in the newspaper for a few days, where every man in that feminist restaurant down in one of our great hipster suburbs was charged 12% more because of the 12% discrepancy in terms of what women are paid compared to men. And, they'll film all these women who are clueless going, yeah, that sounds right. And that sounds fair in terms of equality. And they'll interview one or two men, and you could tell they only aired the guys that nodded. You get some guy who looks like a father, a stay-at-home dad going, whose cheeks are flushed red because he's embarrassed to be had this question addressed to him on national TV, and he's just kind of nodding and going, well, sounds good. Men have had it too good for too long, and what's wrong with us playing? And it's just kind of, and then you have the reporter thing saying, there you have it, everyone. It's official. And it's kind of like, oh, fuck.
But I guess if you live in that microcosm, because that's really what it sounds like, a microcosm of alleyways and organic food and flavorful coffee, that, I'm going to sneeze, or maybe not. Try some. Anyway, thank you. Sorry. Oh, yeah, you're not. That if you never leave that microcosm, everything is fine, right? I mean, if your whole world revolves around the microcosm of hipster Melbourne culture, as this couple on YouTube, for example, it's clearly the case. I mean, that is the world, and there's no intrusion upon that. I want to ask another element that I hear quite a bit about, and that is that there's been a huge influx of immigrants to Melbourne.
Oh, yeah. And I'd act to that. Fuck yeah. It's fucking immigrant. Fucking immigrant. But especially, I can attest in, and again, people say, well, that's subjective. But in the area I live on the outskirts of Melbourne, and it's kind of like one of the fringe, newer areas when I moved in here, probably 10 to 15 years ago, and it was newer families. The influx of immigrants into this area, particularly in the last 5 years, is so pronounced that you'd need to be an idiot to pretend not to notice it. So much so that the amount of restaurants, whether they're, again, restaurants.
What about the restaurants?
What about the restaurants? It's like, what about the children? What about the restaurants? But there are
cuisine
and supermarket, Indian supermarkets, Sudanese supermarkets for getting all the ingredients for your Sudanese food, and it's just it's all this stuff. Which I'm saying there's nothing wrong with it, but it's so pronounced the ability of people to willfully pretend and pander to saying, oh well, I don't see that. It's just diversity, and it's kind of like, oh fuck, it's. How many?
Right, and I think that could be an issue that could be easily resolved. You can just say, well, yes, everything's changing and I like it. Maybe some people do. And you could say everything's changing and I don't like it. Clearly some people don't. But to pretend that nothing is happening, to sort of pussyfoot around the issue and then just say, well, what about the restaurants?
Yeah, and it's not. And I've got nothing against Sudanese. I've got nothing against Indian people. But in the same way that if somebody pointed out to me a whole bunch of the MGTOW community that are angry, pissed off, women-hating, non-intellectually based, just ranting idiots who are traditionalists at heart, who just want to get back on the plantation, I'll be the first to not throw them under the bus, but I'll be the first to say I think they're a bunch of dickheads and it's dysfunctional and blah, 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 blah. So I'm not beholden to them. In the same way, I can't understand how people can't be just objectively honest and say, yeah, there is a large influx. And people don't allow themselves to even acknowledge a reality like saying a simple sentence like, fuck, there are a lot of Indians here. And if you say that, people go, whoa, 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 human. It's like, what's wrong with just stating a fact? There are fucking a lot of Indians here in the last 5 years. But it's almost seen as like what you're hating Indians because you're just stating an overwhelming influx in the last couple of years in a short amount of time. Or, there's
stating facts these days does equate to hate, as we know. So,
and like I said, I have nothing against them. Really, honestly, I have nothing against any.
With all due respect, that is about as milquetoast a statement as I've heard coming from you right now, because I do think that there are actual consequences, observable consequences that are factual. That when you get massive influx of immigrants, that it completely changes the dynamic of society. That's not particularly milquetoast, but I think there are consequences. Now, on an individual level, I would have, I don't think against anyone either. Yeah,
but what I'm saying is I've got nothing against them, their culture, their heritage, whatever. I agree with you 100% where you have an influx of something and disrupting the kind of the workings of a system that sort of works fairly well. Any sudden disruption of a system or stirring of the pot, you're going to have unknown consequences in a very short amount of time. That's what happens. So it's nothing to do with anyone's culture. It's to do with a culture being dropped into another culture like an atomic bomb and pretending that, there's not going to be a mushroom cloud. It gets dropped, and all of a sudden it just melds in like smoothly, like melting cheese, and everything tastes well. Like, no, it's an atomic bomb. It disrupts everything, and then you have to read
dirt theory.
Yeah, it's frustrating not being able to have conversations where you can put politically correct language and kind of institutional knee-jerk responses aside, and let's just talk about nothing personal. Let's just talk about ideas. I've said to you before, I don't take offence at anything anyone says unless they're obviously like directing hatred towards me as an individual or somebody I care about in just a sort of just a personal hating way. But any kind of idea, whether it's about my culture, what ideas I have, I couldn't care less. I really don't care.
Well, that's the thing that Australia increasingly, I guess Melbourne in particular, doesn't really have very much of a culture, especially if you have all the restaurants.
Mm-hmm. There's so much diversity, then we have nothing. You fragment something to such a large degree, then what's the overriding unity? Nothing. Like it's this nebulous term, diversification. It's such a female nebulous bullshit phrase that everyone nods their head and go, oh, it's great. All it conjures up to people is there's a lot of different restaurants and a lot of different cuisines to taste. And a lot of different, from guys' point of view, it's like, I can fuck a lot of different types of women from different nationalities and different cultures. I can fuck a Sudanese woman, and I don't have to travel to Nigeria. I can fuck her here. I can save on a plane ticket. There's all this diversification of cultures that I can sample, and I can kind of, you know what I mean? It's so stupid.
Well, I think the thing that people are not looking into, because it's not politically correct, is that I think when you have too much immigration too rapidly, things transform far too quickly, and society can't catch up. And that's basically what's been happening, specifically in a place like Melbourne, from what I understand and read. It's been so rapid that nobody can really catch up. Nobody even knows what what it means other than ethnic cuisine and restaurants. And nobody wants to call on the question because well, there's so many reasons, but yeah, even as you pointed out, making note of, there are so many new people here. That's racist or xenophobic. I do think that Melbourne is probably at this stage just past any point of the point of return.
The metaphor I use, and we touched on it before about the toothpaste being out of the tube, is Melbourne's continually stepping on the tube and not even allowing anyone to try and put anything back. It's this continual pumping out of toothpaste, and it's just ever increasing. And one thing I note is that people who champion diversification, which I really, really hate, I think the more intellectual a mind you have, and the more sort of leaning towards clarity, is you don't want diversification. The intellectual mind that's trying to get down to the truth wants simplicity and wants things boiled down to simple, the bare elements to make sense of the world. And the more we believe in, spinning 50 plates in the name of diversification, the less we can come to the truth, because you can't hold 50 divergent points at once. You can't believe that 50 different cultures all at each other's throats and try, this culture trying to assimilate me while another culture is trying to assimilate that culture and everyone at each other's throats. None of that gets to any truth. And so the intellectual mind believes more in simplicity, whereas this, especially my city of Melbourne, believes in the opposite, believes in diversification, which is, to me, anti-intellectualism, anti-getting to the heart of matters, because it negates narrowing the funnel to get to anything. Everything's all so fragmented that there's no truth. There's no consensus.
I actually agree with you. And the other thing, it's good you brought this up, is that people complain about the runaway identity politics of our time. Well, if you have 30 different ethnic and cultural groups all coming in your city, what do you expect them to do? There's no instantiation of an overarching culture that they have to adhere to, because that overarching culture, which I would argue had historically been basically sort of this Anglo-British inheritance with some smatterings of indentured servants from Ireland, as well as some other European people. Well, that doesn't exist anymore. So what do they look to? Well, they just bring their own culture and just continue it. And when the numbers are sufficient enough, and these people don't will call me all kinds of names, call me racist for this, but I think history has proven it now that when a number of immigrants or differentiated people or whatever exceeds whatever that percent might be, and I don't know exactly what it is, the point where they form their own ghettos, their own communities that exist independently of the majority or former majority, they no longer feel the pressure to conform and to adhere to new standards, and thus can no longer be assimilated. And once you reach that threshold, whatever that percentage is, and it's a question I think that needs to be investigated, but no one will because it's taboo. You get the point of you're at the point of no return, and then you cannot assimilate people because they have their own. You'll have your own Indian. You probably even have your own special variety. Your Dravidian Indians there, who won't mix with the Hindus, with the more northernly people, and every which way you swing it.
Well, the funny thing is, touching on and this isn't to pick on, this is to touch on non-assimilation, which I sort of did in the second last video about titled "Women Don't Assimilate," where I joked about women go to Morocco for a holiday, and so they think that inviting Morocco to the West will be a great idea. They have no concept of the dominoes falling and how it'll affect. But in terms of. But I'm quite serious. I'm pretty sure that's their rationale. Like, I had a great time in Morocco. I felt great, so I want that feeling to come back here.
Ahmed had a really big cock, and he reamed me really well. Can't wait for more of that when I get back home.
It was a refreshing change from my boring life in a cubicle job here and not finding a man.
Yeah.
Over there, I could fuck Ahmed, and I was exotic. Let's bring it over here, and I'll get that feeling back. But what I wanted to touch on in terms of as an example, and it touches on the restaurant, the laughable restaurant, diversity of restaurant metaphors, and the non-assimilation aspect too, is that what I've noticed, and a lot of, I suppose, Melbourne people and Australian people in general, and I'd say a lot of Indian people would agree with me too, is here in Melbourne, especially in my area, Indians, they generally love dining out at only Indian restaurants. So the restaurants they go to, they don't even assimilate to different diverse restaurants. They don't even take part in the diversity that Westerners take part in. They will just go to their own restaurants. And I'm sure there are just like there's not all women are like that, not all Indians are like that, but 95% that I see eat curries and they go to these I go past Indian restaurants and it's just wall to wall Indians. And good for them, but they do not assimilate restaurant-wise. Whereas Australia has a very short history anyway. They don't really have much of a tradition. And so Australians tend to love sampling from this diverse source of people and restaurants and this kind of culture. But the cultures they bring in, they don't. A lot of them don't like to assimilate, even so much as... I told you,
there's sufficient numbers such that they don't need to.
Yeah.
Now, if the numbers were much smaller, then maybe they would have to go to Luigi's Pizza Place or ridiculous on the restaurants, or try out some Mexican food or whatever.
Well, even the pizza places. Sorry to interrupt, but even the pizza places I know here that. What I've noticed is, say, my parents' generation, who are European, they assimilated really well. They learnt the language. They worked hard. They didn't take any favors. Italians, Slavs, a lot of that kind of first generation in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and maybe a little in the 80s. Whereas now I'm noticing even those Italians who set up pizza shops, who assimilated and brought their culture here to Australians, they're even accommodating Indians. They're putting curry on their on pizzas, but the Indians aren't making spaghetti or anything like that. So there's this when you look at it, you can really see a divergence in who assimilates and who doesn't, and it's very easy.
Once again, I think we can understand this. I think once again, you reach a certain proportion of immigration that occurs too rapidly, without any controls, and the numbers just beget more numbers, and then there's no pressure to conform or assimilate. So you cite various Slavs and Italians. Yeah, at the time, they were a minority population, and so they saw the need to conform to some degree. Sure, they could bring their pizza or whatever else they wanted to bring with them. But when numbers just get too big, it's uncontrollable. It's just a fact. Now, if we could just acknowledge that, then we might have a healthy debate about whether or not that's desirable. I'm not making one claim, at least now, in this context, whether it's desirable or not. I'm just saying that is the effect it has. It's not been rigorously studied scientifically because nobody cares. But if you look at history, that's what happens. You reach a certain threshold in terms of immigration. It exceeds that threshold, and then all bets are off. And forget about assimilation and conformity. I see that in my own neighborhood.
Yeah.
I mean, you can spend all of your time in my neighborhood, probably get by with only speaking Turkish if you wanted to. Now, okay, but I mean, we can't even get to the stage where we can acknowledge that. And I'd love to be proven wrong on this because I think that's what history shows us. It's history for the last 50 years. Why is identity politics run amok in all of these countries, from Melbourne, from Australia to the United States to Canada? Because there's so many groups of different people whose numbers have reached such proportions that they are all playing the identity politics game, and there is no majority culture to turn to anymore. And when that's pretty much what's happened.
I actually think you're 100% correct, because when people trickle through at a manageable rate, or at least, I don't know if it's right, whether they vetted the cultures coming in to see, because Europeans tended to have a different kind of work ethic, or work ethic at all, compared to some other third world countries today. And when you came to a country, I remember, it's not just the anecdotal experience of my parents, but time and time again I hear from other Europeans that settled in the 60s, 70s, and including my parents, the very common, almost uniform phrase that's spoken is, yes, we migrated from Europe, we knew nobody, and we had to get a job, and we had to do this, and we had to learn this. So they came, and they had to, and they worked hard. Whereas what you're saying, I think, it makes rational sense. You drop an atomic bomb of people here, and they're the majority, and you go, why the fuck should we have to do anything? They're giving us everything.
You pointed out, you said the Indians go to the Indian restaurant. So they go to the Indian laundromat, they go to the Indian restaurant, they go to the Indian grocery store. They have everything they need, and they can speak Hindi or Tamil or whatever it is, language from India they bring with them, and they don't need to conform. Same thing's happened in London. This has been something that's been operative in New York City for eons now, or many decades at the very least. This is the fundamental problem that no one wants to address.
And in terms of benefit, even for the, say, Indians, not to pick on the Indians, could be any sort of recent sort of culture that's sort of being dropped like an atomic bomb onto the West, is that for their benefit, like, say, for instance, with my parents and other generations where immigration was there was a narrower funnel of people dripping through, is they had the benefit of then they benefit from this culture and their assimilation and learning the West and learning a new language and learning all of this stuff. If you drop an atomic bomb of people here where they're the predominant race, and this whole culture, say in your city or my city here is predominantly Indians, where they don't have to, they intellectually further themselves like not an inch. They don't need to sort of expand their horizons or learn anything. They don't diversify or learn anything new. They stay exactly where they are.
There's no pressure to do so.
And as a consequence, society as a whole doesn't, not that I care much, but the natural effect of society progressing the way it used to, 50 years ago, doesn't happen because you've just grabbed a whole bunch of people.
Well, I do care. I do care about macro phenomena, and I think that fundamentally changing the direction or character due to poor decisions, such as mass immigration, that is uncontrolled, where surely on a numbers basis it just doesn't work. I mean, there are other elements I think at play, but I think this is the crux of the argument you could make that's probably the most reasonable one. Yeah, you're going to end up with a lopsided society. One that's very fractured, one where people the pressure just isn't there to conform.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to lead anywhere. In fact, we've seen this historically. All you're going to get is ghettoization.
Yeah, stay stupid.
I mean, you can Chinatown, New York City. I mean, people call it Chinatown. It's a fucking giant ghetto. It's a giant ghetto for usually Han Chinese to. Just to speak their language and hang out with their fellow people and just live that life that they want. And New York City has tons of these enclaves historically, has had many of them. And everyone pretending that they all get along and like each other, but they don't. They avoid each other. I mean, to the extent that they have to have some kind of business relationship, sure. But for the most part, they have their cliques and their little ghettos. And I'm not necessarily by that I don't mean it's ghetto in quality or flavor. Some of them are actually sort of ghetto, like man, that shit ghetto. But I mean, just these sort of enclaves, these isolated groups. And I think we need to have a public discussion on whether or not, first off, if this is actually a thing, since it's not acknowledged, even though it's obvious it's a thing. And for people to say, well, okay, I'll take that. If that's what diversity means, that's what we want. I think it's a question that I do think needs to be brought to the public, because particularly in Europe, where I live, Europe is transforming very, very, very rapidly. Now, people might know what I say, but I recently saw a post, some Dutch girl complaining about being harassed by men. Well, which men were harassing her? It was not Dutch men. It was the exotics, right?
Yeah.
Now, people don't want to hear that, and people in MGTOW find that upsetting because it means an anti-male. No, people from different cultures and backgrounds behave differently, and when you exceed numbers, as has been the case, there's no policy for. And here's the other thing: is the attitude towards divergent behavior. This is related to numbers too, because if you were an immigrant with let's call this country X, right, that historically never had more than 4% Indians, and there was a slow trickle that you always ended up with 4% Indians. The majority of the people were Anglo-Irish and with a smattering of continental European. Okay. Well, the person in that 4% community who wanted everything Indian, everyone would think he would be weird, and there would be there would be lots of pressure for him to not behave in that way, because it would reflect upon the Indian community there. They would want to be viewed in a positive light because they were a minority, and so there's a kind of reciprocal pressure that goes back and forth. When you don't have that, and there isn't the heavy hand of a majority culture that is going to smack down, give the smackdown to effectively what sort of insurrectionist behavior of a sort. That culture, when you combine it with numbers, above all, combine it with numbers, it's a buffet. They can do whatever they want, and no one will punish them. This happened, for example, this was actually talked about in the public because it was so dramatic. What happened in Rotherham in the UK? Do you know what happened in Rotherham?
No.
There was a mass grooming and raping of young girls. No, it wasn't fabricated. It actually took place. The vast majority of the people who did it were quote-unquote Asian men. This is a code for Pakistani in the United Kingdom. There were journalists that came out years later and said, we were afraid to report on this because we didn't want to be called racist. Now, I think very few people who exist within sort of the norms of ethics would say that grooming and having sexual relations with underage girls is appropriate. But in this particular case, this is well documented and covered elsewhere. I'm just mentioning as an example. They were afraid to be called racist. So I mean, there are consequences to this. Now, if we could just at least get to the stage where we say, yes, society has transformed as a consequence of this, and we love it. Some people love it. Okay, that's something. Maybe you do like ghettoization and Indians only eating in Indian restaurants and Indian laundromats and Indian grocers, and they get their Baileys and curries only. Okay, that's great. But then let's at least get there where we can acknowledge this, because that is what is happening across every it's happening to lesser degrees in other countries, but certainly Western society, Canada, United States, Europe. And here's the other thing. When the millionth kebab place is opened up someplace in Norway or Sweden, it's not special anymore, right?
Yeah. But they look, you probably know that the higher the intellect a person has, the more consecutive thoughts they can actually balance at once, and they can see how dominoes can fall quite logically. With these people that just live in the moment, I feel what I feel now and I want this. It's a very childish way of thinking. They don't care. And to them, and it's a big PR problem where everything's beholden to PR. They can't say that, Pakistanis or Somalians or whatever the culture is are responsible because it doesn't sound good, because the government know that all these very cheap refugees will provide a very cheap workforce, and it'll create competition, and businesses will be able to lower costs because they can employ people, and it's, all this all this kind of web of effect that'll benefit business. But when you're beholden to the monetary system and you're beholden to the PR and marketing that sort of drives it, it's very hard. Like you and I, we value just honesty, and we see progress coming from that foundation, whereas they see progress just coming from whatever works for money in the short term. You know,
I agree.
We fuck men over. We don't care what happens in the next couple of generations. All right, what do we do now, fellas? Just import some other people who will have babies. And
it's not just that. I mean, it's fucking men over. They're fucking entire cultures, histories, and traditions over that have worked reasonably well because of ostensible expediency. I mean, I'm skeptical about the claim that all this mass immigration really has economic benefit. I've since lost contact with him. I don't know what happened to him, but C.S. McTow claimed he'd done some studies, claimed he was going to... Anyway, I don't think that is the case, but I might be wrong about that. But even so, then you need to pose the question that, is economic expediency the only thing worthwhile? And I would argue it's not. I think that there can be, and ideally for a reasonably coherent society to work reasonably well, there needs to be an appreciation of a certain type of culture, as opposed to when you have a million different ones, you take your pick. But there's no directional force there, is there? It's just, but I'll eat my Indian today and my Sudanese the next day.
Yeah, and but you have an appreciation for the long game, both for history and for the future, whereas most of modern society only lives in the moment. And just as a side note, that's one thing that kind of really shits me, because they've co-opted a lot of, say, good philosophical and spiritual terms where, say, for mental health, like actually being focused on whatever you're talking about now, there's a certain type of clarity to get to the truth. They've co-opted that into meaning, fuck history and fuck the future. It's all about the now. That's spiritually healthy, but that's not what healthy spiritual, practices that you can actually learn something that can inform and learn from history going forward means. That's just by the by. That's just something I wanted to touch on. But you have an appreciation for the long game, as do I. In terms of these people, the majority of the West, the majority of the world now, is you look at what the world's run by is markets. They judge the markets hourly and daily. The markets. This is what the market's finished at. The Nikkei Dow finished at this many points, and every day it's where we finish today, and tomorrow we reset, and that's all they care about. I remember my father buying, personally, back in the day when I was a kid, my father bought a car. And the type of advertising pushed was buy the one car that would last your family a lifetime. There was a sense of quality that would last a lifetime. There was quality and there was future. You could count on something, and there was.
Dude, man, I still to this day somewhere stored away. I have my father's army duffel bag. Now my father was in the military, I believe, from 63 to 65. So his duffel bag is still intact and still works. I mean, I'm turning to old folks. Back in the day, this used to work well, and then break down. But yeah, we do have a throwaway. We have a throwaway culture in every sense. We throw away our fellow human beings on a moment's notice because reasons. We throw away the objects we purchase, and everything becomes an issue with just throwing money at the problem. Right? So you can't fix this. We'll just throw money at it. Buy something new. Now, I was lucky. I recovered my now somewhat old 4 gigabyte stick, USB stick, but I mean, and I fall for it too. I was just thinking, well, if I can't find it, I still have the information on my hard drive. I just could buy a new one tomorrow. Everything is just to throw money at it, replace things. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Human beings included. Above all, men have become the ultimate throwaway commodities in our time. But I mean, once again, they lack the big picture. They have no idea how we got here. They have no idea about history. No idea about the cultures they've either. I mean, here's another fundamental issue I would like to bring up here: is that if you forego an overarching culture, then there's no culture to which people can pledge their allegiance or conform. But if you have so many people from so much diversity, as it were, you can't rightly, at least in a political sense, say that, well, this culture is actually better than yours, even though it's all these people leaving the slums and shanties and shitholes of India to inhabit Melbourne. They're leaving for a reason.
Yeah.
They're not leaving. So implicit is obviously that whatever they're fleeing from is worse than what they're fleeing to. And that used to be a principle in the United States for a lot of cases. Now it's just, well, I don't really sure. I think the United States is in a similar boat. I don't know what American culture really is anymore. It's just this hodgepodge of identity politics, I guess. But there's nothing to aspire to anymore. Well, there's nothing to move to.
Yeah, particularly in America's case, and from what I read and see, a lot of the people that immigrated to the US, Italians and people in the, from 30s, 40s, 50s and all of that, there was a big draw to kind of a better way of life. What you work for can be yours. You're rewarded with a pension. There are rewards, and you build your life to something, and you live the American dream, but you have to assimilate and love the flag. There needs to be some sort of assimilation to the country you're going to.
And part of that is unfortunately in the process giving up something of your past. Now, that's, I think, another crux of the issue there.
Well, like you said, they're coming here for a reason. They don't just, unfortunately, you hear a lot of cases. It's funny, although not funny in a lot of ways. I know, in particular with Germany, they say, "Oh, we're going to Germany for a better way of life," but then a lot of just the males go, and they leave their women back in Africa. So they're just going there to plunder and make money, and they're sort of sending money back. If they wanted to, they move their whole family there and take that big risk and make a definite sort of statement. Okay, I'm going to come here and make a way of life. I'm going to stand on my principles with the things I value, my children, my wife.
This is the problem too, because there will be some Ahmed someplace who's gonna do that. It's just he's not representative from what I can see and looked at of the majority. This is the problem. We talk about, whether it's Nawalt or Naxalt as in X, not... there is always some Naxalt principle that is operative, whatever population you're talking about, but we have to look at aggregate trends and what's happening. So in the case of Melbourne, I'm sure that there is going to be a Rashid or some other Indian who is... as Australian as the inland Taipan is, right? Yep. And he's going to conform, and he's going to have the silly accent, no offense, and all the rest of it, right? But he's probably a minority, and based on what you can observe. And some guys say, well, I know Rashid, and he's the spitting image of the Australian. This is the problem. We don't look at aggregate trends, whether it comes to women or immigration or anything else.
I mean, the benefit, like you said, they came here for the reason, but there's so many intellectual and progress benefits for assimilating to a culture that's preferable. There's so many reasons where you come here. If you assimilate, you benefit in all those ways. When you just come here for a few extra bucks, but you still want to live in a ghetto and wear a baseball cap backwards and, listen to rap music, what are you coming here for? It's just a few extra bucks so you can buy better caps and, a car with spinning rims. Is that a father of children? Not that I'm that way disposed, but I look at these people who are fathers of children and mothers of children that are supposed to be teaching them some sort of example, and all they come here is for shiny objects and, championing ghetto culture.
Because that's all the West has to offer these days. It's just commodities. You pointed out, just money. Everything's... every time I'll hang out online with an American friend of mine, he obviously says it in a facetious manner. Well, the stock market did well today, and increasingly I'm sort of judging and interpreting that statement as a sort of existential commentary on humanity itself, because there's nothing on offer other than the almighty dollar, whether that's an Australian kangaroo dollar or otherwise. But yeah, there's no political principle there, because anything goes, right? There is no overarching culture to conform to. There's no appreciation. I'm not against immigration. I think it needs to be slow and measured and controlled, and we need to account for certain things. So, for example, if there were data out there that told us, look, any given population exceeds 10%, the following issues ensue. Then we can control the flow of immigration such that the population doesn't increase beyond 10%, and maybe you'll still have your restaurants or whatever, but without the insanity that accompanies it.
Yeah. I'm on the same bent. If you really want to come into, I see it as someone's house. You don't come into someone's house and then just start telling people how to rearrange their furniture. You obviously came in for a reason. Assimilate. And it's not a bad thing. It's not saying you can't now respect your heritage. And, again, the Europeans were allowed to have their religions. And, one can argue that, say, for instance, in America, where a lot of the Christian ideals, there was a lot of live and let live kind of leeway within those religions that kind of allowed for assimilation, because there's more of a respect for the other, even if it's not your Christians. Even if someone's not a Christian, they don't tend to hate somebody else because of their religion. They might think it's stupid. From what I see, just as a general flavour or a general broad brushstroke. But here, when you were talking about when none of history is actually, like, we're erasing history, and not just yesterday's YouTube video, yours or mine, we're erasing decades and, real history, generational long history, as well as not knowing where we're going, and we're only living for today. And then people fucking scratch their heads and go, why aren't relationships lasting? Well, when you only think of today, what's the fucking mystery? Why are you surprised?
You have to, because this stage, I think this is fairly factual. There is I wouldn't say wholesale, but nearly wholesale rejection of quote-unquote Western culture and Western heritage. Now, there are a lot of reasons for this that needn't be gone into here in all detail, but if you can't stick up for a certain tradition, which is foundational across a broad band of different societies, above all the Anglo societies that start off that way, at least places like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, United States, if you can't stick up for that and say, well, this was actually a pretty good thing, whether or not you're Anglo or not, neither you nor I are, but we're different Europeans, but still, if you have no basis, then anything goes. And that allows for the craziness of identity politics. Because here's a guy like Sargon who is, I'm all about the individual. Okay, that's his platform. But here's the issue I see with this. He would need mass Pakistanis and Indians and all these people to say our culture is shit and worse than yours, and we want to become part of it. So few people are going to do that. Now, I think that's a requirement, though, if you really want to assimilate and be part of something that is part of a long tradition. You're not going to get people to do that. Very few are going to say, you know what, the culture and background I came from is shit, or comparatively speaking, worse than the one I'm going to. I'm just going to give it up. Or to the extent that I'm going to not give it up, I will acknowledge its existence and maybe it shape certain things in me or my family or back whatever, but it will have to become subordinate to this new culture.
Yeah,
and that is something. Here's the thing that people, immigration is that immigration entails loss. When my father left Hungary, he eventually lost his Hungarian language for a variety of reasons. Well, mostly because his father remarried a German woman, and there were basically 3 languages in the household, so English had to become the official language of communication. I mean, he lost his Hungarian heritage. It's very unfortunate. But I think that is not necessarily atypical because, well, when you immigrate, traditionally, you lose something in the process and you gain something in return. And in the best of circumstances, the thing you gain in return is better than the thing that you have lost. But now across the West, we accept anybody willy-nilly, and we tell them you can have your cake and eat it too. You can live in your little ghettos, you can keep your culture, your language, your background, all of this stuff, and you can be the same. You can be American or Australian at the same time without ever defining at all what that means, being Australian or American. And I would argue that there's so many things tearing society asunder, but this is one of the things. Because that's why there's runaway identity. Nobody even knows what it means to be X anymore. It's not even implied, and it's not even implied what it means to be an American anymore, or an Australian, because it's so fucking confusing. And there's nothing to strive for other than financial success of some sort. Okay, that is ongoing. Immigrants are still successful, depending on where they're from, but there's no common identity really, and so
there's a reluctance to actually even rationally look at, again, the dominoes, how they fall. It's very much a female mindset of, oh, wouldn't it be exciting if this happened tomorrow? Or, you hear people often, because they don't want to think about the reality of what will happen tomorrow or the consequences of what you just step off this cliff for today, what really will happen. The reality is you'll go down. But people will go, because of diversity, we believe in diversity, and it's a nebulous, unquantifiable, but it makes, women feel good. Because
the numbers are never defined. At what point is something diverse?
But it's a romantic sort of descriptive, and people are living in the moment, so they cleave to momentary romantic descriptives like diversity, or why don't you go traveling? And my brain will go, why? And we'll go, oh well, you just you learn all these things and you diverse and you find yourself. It's like, so that's not fucking a reason. Like, tell me why I should travel. But that's the juice that runs people's motivation today. Diversity, travel, because you'll find this unicorn.
Or as I like to joke, food, travel, and culture. That's the female Facebook motto.
Yeah.
And when you look at their interests, food, travel, and culture.
Yeah, chase the unicorn, chase the Nawalt, because you could find this nebulous, vague. Wouldn't it be great? All this imaginary bullshit. But the moment, it's almost like you're putting a downer on things when you intellectually try and sort of say, okay, let's get rid of emotion and let's just talk about 1 + 1 = 2. No, that's boring. And that's the reason why no matter how many intellectual debates, and you've touched on this, that you come across and you say, look, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 the way you're describing, and they'll look at that and say, oh well, that's boring. We're talking about travel. And you've just told us that travel
and organic gluten-free cupcakes.
Yeah, organic. Pumpkin spice latte, nebulous stuff, and the unknown of if I do this today, who knows who will which Romeo I will find tomorrow. All this unquantifiable, magical stuff that could happen.
Eat, love, and pray, as the film goes.
Oh fuck. That rubbish. Yeah, everyone believes in this magical stuff just being bestowed, but when you talk about the hard work that rationally goes into the rare cases that that happens to people, it's very unromantic. We're in this kind of real romantic mindset where hard science and mathematically following the path of something to get to what they want. Even these romantics. they're talking about romantic destinations.
Well, it's not just that. As I said, a total disregard for history. I mean, when you really want to talk about the West in some sense, it sort of begins with Sumeria, and we're talking 6,000 years ago. Most people, I expect, in Australia and New Zealand and the United States, first probably would never even have heard of the term, and certainly couldn't locate it on a map or even put it in some time frame. I've encountered Americans who couldn't even come up with a description of the Roman Empire. I mean, I actually have a double feed for this because I have a friend who's much younger, who's currently enrolled at university, and his fellow students, the degree of ignorance and just they know nothing about anything. They don't even read the course material. Now, to think this is inconsequential in the long run, as these people graduate and become productive members of society, completely uninformed about their own past in many cases. And I would argue that if you're European and the Roman Empire is part of your past, as an example, the world is headed for dire straits because all it will become, the entirety of the world will become some Melbourne alleyway with grandma kangaroo's leather jacket, with some coffee with 1.3 bits of cream in it that cost you $20.
Yeah.
And people reading poetry allegedly in the park. I mean, that's all we're going to have.
Yeah. Yeah. And people's, like I said, people's nature really are desiring the past, and they're refashioning it with this hipster culture without actually knowing that it does matter to them for a reason. The reason that they've got this human instinct to recapture the past is because they feel lost today, and just putting a new paint job on, something, building on something in the past, like, taking old sneakers and making a new version, and because they're cool and, really hip now. There's something about the human spirit that it wants to sort of expand and go forward. The intellect wants to, progress wants to, but when the culture kind of smothers it, it still wants to in some way, I think. And that's these hipster culture. They're just doing it in a very surface way. And it shows in people's depression. And I'm not saying that's the only reason for it, but I found that the people who are more mentally stable are the ones that actually the ones that are less mentally unstable are the ones that are more intellectually curious. And they tend to take more responsibility for how they think. They have an interest. But the ones that, I don't want to think about that, or, nah, it's too intellectual, or you think too much, human. I've had that thrown at me a few times. And all I'm doing is just asking a question. But because it's somewhere where their brain doesn't want to go. And like you said, it could even be something that they like. They're passionate about a certain topic, whatever it might be. And you offer a historical point of view that could actually help them. They have no interest in it. It's a real mental laziness, even for things that they do have an interest in today, that could actually help them in some way, or further the interest that they do have. It's just this real intellectual laziness. And they've been conditioned for so often through media and everything to be politically correct, because
there are no requirements for them to not be lazy.
Yeah.
There are no requirements. For example, most universities in the United States have done away with a sort of core curriculum. Some of them still have it, but most of them, it doesn't exist anymore. I still had one, although I'd argue even at my time it was not as rigorous as it should have been. And every professor I had of old, I had a history professor who was by trade Egyptologist. You listen to his argument. Well, you can decide on your major, as they call it in the United States, later, your subject of study. But right now, you're trying to build a well-rounded human being, and thus you need to study a wide variety of subjects, including science, history, language, maths, whatever. that doesn't. There are no requirements, and to the extent that there are all kinds of avenues out. So I'll give you another example. It seems minor. This friend of mine who attends university. Well, what do a lot of the Korean Americans do to circumvent the necessity of studying a foreign language, because it's a minor requirement to get through the university? They just take Korean, which they already have an advantage for, even if it's not perfect. Easy way out. I saw the same thing with Hispanic people back in the day.
Mm.
So, yeah, people are going to look for it. Well, and nobody has the balls to lay down the law and say, look, these are the requirements, and if you can't meet them, you're out of here.
Yeah, because it reduces people who can get jobs and the amount of people you can tax. I mean, here, even high school here, it's been a while now, a couple of generations where they've done away. I still went through high school where, I had to get a percentage measure for, how much I passed the subject by. Whereas now it's just pass or fail. The percentage of, whether you got 50 or 60% for physics, that can't be known. All that's known is you either passed or you failed. And now I recently heard that a lot of companies are taking people who had as low as something like a 33 or 35% percentile pass rate in a lot of their university subjects. So they're lowering it just to get more people in the workforce, in terms of saying, we're discriminating against people from other countries that aren't as intelligent, or they haven't had the benefit, they haven't been here long enough to learn the language, and it's kind of like, what the fuck has that got to do with physics or engineering? I think it's a minor to sort of learn a modicum of English to be passable to go to university and communicate. Making your sort of dictionary or lexicon in terms of being able to communicate to people in university at a very base level, having your inner dictionary to be only 10 pages long is sufficient for you to pass physics or.
Well, Coltrane has a friend who works, I believe, in an administrative role at some university in Kangaroo Land, and this isn't unique to Kangaroo Land, but particularly with East Asian students, how the English requirements are sort of dropped so as to allow them to funnel their money into the system. So I saw this rampant in the United Kingdom when I was doing advanced degrees there. The standard, I mean, it would put a Lee Kuan Yew to shame, as an example, because there just were no standards, and they were able to get lots of money from this nouveau riche class from China, for example, that had at the time really become an emergent force there, who could afford all kinds of things with their parents' money. And, the problem is we've once again reached that threshold of beyond the point of no return.
Mm.
Who is going to reinforce standards? Silly old men, such as myself, that nobody has any regard for, think are just, a waste of time?
Yeah.
Or racist, or sexist, or name it, whatever, any combination of the above. No, it's not going to happen. When we have in the United States professors cowering before their students, because the professors have no authority status anymore. Forget it. I really do think things are, at this stage at least, too far gone. Mm. There might be things in the woodworks that could radically alter the course of things, but all of this, we can call it the Melbourne effect. Maybe that's what I'll call it, and as a title. But the Melbourne effect is it's everywhere, and the best case scenario is people are going to be willing to deal with the actual fallout. Well, we have all these immigrants, we have this, and we've given women everything they want, and it all sucks, and everyone's miserable. What can we do with that? What new concoction can we come up with this time? That's probably the best case scenario for the foreseeable future. Mm. Long term, who knows?
And look, don't forget there's a correlation between how much a person's willing to lose and correlate it to the degree to which they will be intellectually honest. So, say now you've over the generations with feminism, etc., and the government, you've broken down traditional families, whether or not you or I, want it. But the fact is that's what's happened, and so people are becoming when people are fragmented and certain people can kind of go their own way, what you do is you get other cultures in that have large families, and so in the future they'll have a lot more to lose, and so you control them even more because none of them want to lose their family. So it's the degree to which the more a person has to lose or is afraid to lose is I think there's a correlation to how honest, even if they have it in them, like you or I, how much they're willing to be honest, how much I've seen it in jobs where I've contracted as a designer where I've been one of a bunch of designers where the companies had to cut one or two of our positions, and a lot of times mine has been the position to go just because they know I don't have a family and children, and they'd rather not sack the guy over here who does have kids and a family. And I realise that, and I do have less to lose, which is probably why I am more intellectually honest, and I have the freedom to do what I want, and I value my freedom. And as a side note, I was actually listening to one of your videos about it's an older one. As a side note, yesterday about the shaming of men, the fear of commitment, and how it's actually it's not so much a fear of commitment but pro-freedom. And there's so many men that are pro-freedom because they've just got too much to lose. Their freedom is held up in their prison of marriage. They view that as freedom. I've got the freedom to go to a job, and I've got the freedom of my lovely marriage. That
people like structure. I think men above all, they enjoy structure and some kind of routine. I mean, like I said, I've been facing prejudice and bias because I'm not an office cubicle worker, and even though I was telling you before, I go to some of these viewings, flats to rent, and they're asking for half what I'm currently paying. And if I've been paying what I've been paying for 6 years straight, and I have a letter of recommendation from the landlord that says I've never missed a single instance of rent by the first of the month, but they're all. I mean, if I were sort of a standard office worker drone, it'd be easier. I think, but people like structure, and even I, to some degree, think structure is useful. It's useful to, quote unquote, go get up and go to the gym, run your errands, come back. I mean, this is something that I agree with Peterson on when he's talking about the sort of chaos order dynamic. There's something to that, I think.
Yeah, but the fact that they can only perceive structure in such a limited framework, like Stardust, we can only back you if your structured life is an office cubicle worker, but we can't actually see any kind of structure in another way. It's really sad that they can't see past the traditionalist routine and structure. It's been reduced like.
Well, part of that's just German culture. That's just the things I loathe. There aren't too many, but I mean, the Prussian rigidity is one of them. But yeah, I mean, definitely, I think that. Yeah, but we're essentially rallying against the wind here. It reminds me of a time when I was much younger, after facing some disappointment, and I remember this was I think I was at the University of Massachusetts doing some philosophy course, summer course there, and there was some big disappointment that occurred. I don't remember what it was, and I was just screaming at the thundering sky at the gods. It was 17 or 18, demanding that that they apportion justice to me, or else strike me down with lightning. It didn't happen, obviously. But people like us, guys like us, we are. Well, you're less. I argue you're less freakish than I am. I mean, in a complimentary sense, by the way. Yeah, I think that's just nobody really cares about what we have to say because. For one thing, we're genetic dead ends, so we're not going to be contributing to the forthcoming generation. And reproductive drive is. I mean, that's the knockdown argument of many people, of all sorts of critics. That's one thing I'll hear often from alt-right critics. Well, it doesn't really matter, you're genetic dead end. Oh, it's good you're not reproducing.
And don't forget the hypocrisy of all they talk about is the now. You're trying to talk about history and where we're going in the future, and they don't want to listen to it. But then when it comes to genetic progeny, it's all about the future. They
Well, it's I've always thought that very odd that they would well, it's not odd, and it is at the same time. It's odd in the sense that they will stress the importance of genetic progeny, but not think about the long track that of the past and the future long term. When I think about things, I'm thinking about the long term, what would far exceed whatever genetic progeny I may or may not have. And so, yeah, I mean, the part of this is just human nature. We certainly didn't evolve in the type of environment that would necessitate taking into account things like geological time. We're talking millions and millions of years. But even, I mean, delayed gratification is a very difficult thing for most human beings because the now is all you have. So, for example, at the moment, I'm fasting today, and I'm feeling. I imagine ghrelin would be the hormone acting up that's causing my hunger right now. I feel very hungry, and I need to have some sense of delayed gratification to stall until tomorrow at least, the next time I eat, or maybe I'll do another day. That's one instance of me taking a day at a time. Every time I try to fast for more than a day or two and say, well, I'm going to fast for 5 days, it doesn't work out that way. But yeah, I think that's just human nature, and this is why my calls to think about the big picture will always be ignored by the vast majority of people.
Well, I always, I've mentioned it to a few people when I'm out with friends and people where you notice really awful childish behavior of parents, young parents, and their kids are screaming, and it's like livestock. And it's like you're watching something without a prefrontal cortex, and you go, fuck, I'm not interested at all in any kind of legacy being left, but I'm I'm more responsible, and I think more responsibly than these fuckwits that get on their pedestals and pronounce all this, what about the children? And, genetic legacy, and you act in ways that I couldn't even do. And I'd have more leeway to do it because I am selfish, a lot more selfish. But you pronounce that you care about your children and you care about the future and all this stuff, and you act in the worst possible ways, and you won't even listen to people, not just like me, but people who will tell you, if you think your genetic legacy and the future of your children is so important, the way you say it is, or the way you pontificate that it is, why do you not even want to listen to anyone telling you that based on history and how you can get to where you are? It's like someone giving you the map to the Ark of the Covenant and you saying, fuck that, I'll find my own way. Yet finding that treasure is the thing you live for. It's just infuriating. It's again, it's back to
well, I don't really get too infuriated. I think as time goes on, I just get more, I would say apathetic. I think I'll always care about the fate of humanity, but I guess I get apathetic to things like that, statements like that. Oh, you're just a genetic dead end, or whatever. Because it's just distracting. In as much as have any significance, I don't think I have very much, but I want to engage in dialogue and focus on things that will push this envelope of civilization further. And that's just a distraction listening to people.
Well, the times
I do want to make a mimetic contribution, not for myself, but for what we've had and what we can have in the future. Maybe. I'm just very skeptical that we'll have anything. I'll put it that way.
I mean, I get infuriated generally when people say things that are just stupid and they're the general Western pedestrian that believes everything in the media. I generally have a sort of roll the eyes response of neutrality. I kind of don't think much of them. But when it infuriates me is when you think they're engaging in a conversation and a healthy dialogue. And you spend your energy and time thinking that this person, like you and I now, we're engaging, we're back and forth, we're sharpening ideas, we're interested in a topic. And when you spent all this energy and time, their response is, like on my second last videos, an 18-minute video, and then I get a response from someone saying, well, somebody's not getting laid. And that's the degree to which, that's what I mean. When my time's being wasted and I think the person I'm talking to, I'm not, I think I'm serving my time well, and then I'm just kind of, I've been shown that I've just wasted an hour of my time.
Well, this is related to a recent video I put out in some sense. I call it the non-transferable technically correct. Incidentally, that video was demonetized too. I have no idea why, but okay. That people approach the world from their own perspective, and we're all limited in that regard. I am too, so are you. But if the perspective of the respective individual is such that it's very, very limited, such that maybe when he gets laid, all of his problems are solved. It's hogwash, but still. That's the way he's going to view it. I mean, I saw a guy recently leave a comment. It was related to me, but more to a reactionary expat who's a friend of mine, calling him a white sex tourist, that every white guy who goes to Asia is just a sex tourist. Now, to me, that speaks more of his own, that the commenter's motivations, why he goes there, than the reactionary expat or myself. Oh, I lived and worked in South Korea. That must be because I was a sex tourist. I mean, it's ludicrous, but these are people of limited scope in mind who can only imagine things within their own framework. So if a man is particularly horny and thirsty, and you don't display that behavior and don't sort of fit his model, his particular way of viewing the world and his own behavior, well, in as much as you don't, you're simply lying. So if I say I'm not obsessed with sex and pursuing women, and it's a legitimate disinterest that I have, it's not believable, because their whole world is viewed by their sex drive and their obsession with women, as an example. Just like this guy commenting on, white guys in Eastern Asia are just sex tourists.
Yeah,
I mean, it's ludicrous.
And you can spend an hour there quite calmly and rationally saying, no, that's not correct. And
they won't believe you, because their own world, that's their world. The guy making the comment probably has gone to Asia just to fuck women, probably. And
well, they're the times that I say it infuriates me, where you calmly try and say, well, no, this isn't the case, and you spend the time rationally saying why you go to Asia, and then at the end of it they'll say, like, or say the topic is most commonly about, say, children in my case, like I don't want children, and I outlay very calm reasons why, given my personality, I'd never have any interest. And they nod, and then after an hour they go, yeah, but you'll be sorry when you're 60. And it's the same kind of thing. Like, that's the only time I know we've got biases, but the inability for someone to kind of even have the modicum of respect to listen to someone's words and go, okay, this person, I respect their rationale. I might think he's going to be sorry, but he's given me the benefit of, like, outlaying why. I guess I'm not really affected by it, but it kind of just pisses me off when people pretend to be genuine in a certain way, and you engage with them in that genuine manner, and it just falls that they're just nodding at you, and then they just kind of.
Well, yeah, I mean, at the very least, if they just tolerate it, but some people express open opposition, not even to your ideas, to your very existence. They say, a person such as you cannot exist, because my world is ruled exclusively by my physiological passions. That's the most common I've encountered. That somehow I'm behind the facade, the quote-unquote pretentious facade. I spend every waking hour thirsting for women. I mean, it certainly would, in some ways, make my life easier. It would be more directed, I'll tell you that much. It would be easier. Got to get a better job, more status, blah-de-blah. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if that were the case. But it's just easier for these people to conceive of the world as such, because that's their own conception.
It's easier to character assassinate, because if he has to challenge you on ideas, you'll probably win. And especially on any of the topics that you're well versed in. So what can everyone win in is kind of female emotional, kind of momentary, you're a loser, if that doesn't work, you switch musical chairs and you go, well, you didn't get laid, or did you get molested with when you were a kid? Whatever it is, they just keep switching chairs.
or Stefan, did your mother spank you? Did your mother spank you as a child?
Yeah. That's one thing that kind of annoys me a little bit, where a caller calls in about a specific topic, but he goes, hang on. What was your childhood like? And it's always back to, did
your mother spank you? I bet she spanked you.
Look, I still like him, but I cherry pick stuff.
I can't sit through his stuff, unfortunately.
Yeah. Look, there's.
But by the way, what time is it over there? It must be quite late.
It's 1 a.m. in the morning, so you're 9 hours behind, yeah.
Yeah, I am.
All right. We've been going for nearly.
We have been chatting for quite some time.
I told you I can ramble.
Yeah, well, I can ramble too. We're all ramblers now.
If I ever open up a coffee shop, I'm going to call it Stardust's ex-girlfriend.
Ex-wife,
Ex-wife,
right?
Yeah.
You got to use the terminology appropriately. I saw a comment recently that, when are you going to be talking about your current wives? Well, there is no current wife. I only have ex-wives.
Yeah. There's this comic book author back in the day. He always drew, admittedly, a very young comic book illustrator and author in the indie scene in Jeffrey Brown, I think his name is. I think he still does work. And one of the funny stories I heard about him, he always drew stories about his love life, his experiences. This was when he was in his early 20s. And one funny story was he went to a party and he had his current girlfriend, and he'd introduce her as, I want to introduce you to my next book.
Yeah. Hey, man, well, if you ever do open up Stardust's ex-wife as a cafe, let me know. Make sure to include the dried up orange peels as a potential receiver of liquid. That might make it extraordinarily fancy and expensive and profitable.
No pumpkin spice latte?
No, we need to transition from the pumpkin spice latte to something even more exotic, trendy, and intellectually valid.
And the funny thing is,
pumpkin spice latte is from yesterday.
And the funny thing is, when you listen to these hipsters, when you can eavesdrop on their conversations, and even people I've been with, if the barista is foreign, it doesn't matter where they're from. Like, it could be from a country where they make shit coffee, right? They'll look at the barista and go, oh, he must be good. He's got a ponytail and he's from Bolivia or wherever it might be, but they automatically think the other. The diverse other culture. Anyone aside from a Western culture, the coffee must be good because he's foreign.
Yeah, well, I mean that's just the name of the game these days. But I mean, it's like I said. I think for the short term, things probably aren't going to be going too well, but it could. It could change eventually.
I think things will level and change course, and there'll be some form of equilibrium. I don't really think it's going to be some catastrophic crash like a lot of doomsday, MGTOW or not videos claim it's going to be. This is going to be.
Well, I think we're in a slow decline, and that'll last. And what lies beyond that, I can't really say.
Yeah.
But
people will have a short memories.
It would take a sheer miracle to really to get us out of the muck that we're in right now.
One thing's for sure, and it's sad that people will have very short memories of what transpired in this past era, in the very near future, in the next generation or so, and you'll have, like it's happening already, women proclaiming none of them have ever been feminists, and that was a shame back then, and they'll skip over all the fundamental things that actually cause the problems, and it'll just be business as usual, but they'll do a new paint job and they'll cross their fingers that it'll work again. So that's the sad bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Barbarossa in the final note, he called this out years ago, that there would come a time when women would start jumping ship off the feminist bandwagon because it wouldn't be seen as fortuitous anymore. And I think we've been that stage for a few years now. Feminism is bad. I hate feminism. I'm a feminine woman. Give me money.
Yeah.
Have a nice day.
I mean, I still date from time to time, but one thing I encourage guys...
That's because you're a pimp. It's in your nature.
Maybe. But one thing I encourage guys to do is, and it's really frowned upon, is to ask women about their history. And it's almost seen as a taboo subject to ask women about their history, and they don't want to be judged on their past. And it's this whole wiping of history mentality, and especially in this microcosm of dating, women rewind and reset themselves to zero. And every date, every time you sit across from a woman, she'll tell you how she's always been this perfect angel and every guy's been an arsehole. And I always encourage guys, like, ask about her past, and they go, nah, that's rude. So fucking no. Like, your life's literally at stake. If you want to date, if you still feel compelled to date and have sex, ask her. And if you can actually refrain from, finding it offensive, you'll start to find out that she's fucked up a lot of things. And in a broader sense in society, when it goes forward and they pretend to wipe history of all the fuck ups that feminism and gynocentrism's cause in this era, they'll pretend to be that girlfriend on the first date and go, oh, let's all start from zero. Let's sing Kumbaya and hold each other's hands. And we weren't those women. We weren't that country. We weren't those politicians. Yet it's just going to be business as usual. So it's a macrocosm of the microcosm of dating, where women reset to zero and they wipe history and they live in the moment on that first date, and they don't want to talk. They don't want to talk about the past.
Well, I talked about this with your fellow Australian. This was earlier this year. The film, how the film just ends for the female and the new one starts.
Yeah.
That's basically what it is. Everything is a new chapter.
A new movie.
There's a new movie. There's the old one's done. There's no continuity.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would agree, man. If I were the dating type, I would do that because it's dangerous. Who knows what STD she's traipsing about in?
Especially as I've gotten older. I mean, I'm in my mid-40s now, but I'd say as I've gotten older, the percentage has increased. But I'd say up until recently, it's more than 70%, I'd say, roughly guessing, that when you ask these single mothers or previously divorced women, you start asking just very benign questions like, oh, okay, so what happened? And then they'll give you vague, just we didn't get along. And then you'll kind of trace back and go, so was he an arsehole? And you'll kind of, because I want to find out, because I'm trying to work out her character as she's mine, because I'm vetting her if we're compatible at the very least. And when you start to nail it down, it always comes back to, I wasn't happy and I just left. And you learn a lot about it. It's just a very microcosm to...
And you could say, as you guys say, she's a fucking cunt.
She's a fucking... Oh, well, this is going to get demonetized now for sure.
Yeah, probably. Well, it was. No, that's a joke. Every time I try to imitate it, Colton says, no, that's not how you do it. It's fucking cunt, man.
Fucking...
It's the Australian vulgarity there.
Yeah. Oh, well, I like I told you, I've been told that I've got a fairly good voice, which I know you don't agree.
Well, yeah, you're a pimp. You stand above the rest, but
I actually hate my voice though.
Well, we're kind of all stuck with what we have, whether we hate it or not. Every time I encounter an Australian female, I have a number of acquaintances online. I cannot stand the accent. There's just something. It's on par with the female American accent, which is just
well, that's to your benefit to not have anything to do with Australian or American women. So, yeah,
it certainly is. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm less biased about other accents, but certainly the American Australian accent is something or Canadian for that matter, that I find difficult to countenance. But
I'm the same. I'm the same way with the really harsh English Cockney accent. The real lower working class slangish. Nothing against them, but just the women when they speak, it's just nails on the chalkboard.
It's much more common amongst men, but yeah, that's definitely.
Especially coming from the country that invented the language that I'm speaking.
Invented is perhaps not the right term, but yeah,
came up with or whatever.
Well, that's at some point in time, I plan on making a video about certain language trends in the UK that have been, I guess you could say, interesting to say the least. But there are other implications involved. But in order to do that, I need to first find a new place to live. So hopefully, when I go to my 3,000th year, no, I'm exaggerating, my several dozens have passed, someone will finally assume the documents of evidence I have and say, well, you're good for it, and I will transfer the rent to them the first of the month for the foreseeable future until that contract ends, and they could just leave me in peace and leave me to work. But until that happens, yeah, the really complicated videos I've started working on, there are a number of them. They're just on a hard drive and or similar such resources, and I will have to wait on that for a bit.
Oh well.
Everyone who doesn't know Hugh Mann, by the way, go check out his channel. He is a master artist. He's a pimp, as we've established, and he knows Melbourne really well. So if you're ever in the neighborhood and you need directions to the droopy-eyed basset hound, well, he can tell you.
Yeah, well, I wish you luck in finding a new place, Stardust.
Yeah, well, that's what it's going to come down to. It's going to come down to some freak occurrence of some non-Prussian-oriented German who says, well, he seems to have a good track record as a solvent. Let's give him a place. I can't even get real estate agents whom I would be paying provisional fees to go to bat for me. So,
yeah. If I was a female, I'd say some nebulous bullshit like everything happens for a reason.
Women don't have this issue. It's basically if I were a woman, it would be easier, or if I were Ahmed, I think it would be easier. They just get free government housing. So anyway. The saga continues, and it will until it ceases to continue. On that note, everyone, I will be providing a link to Hugh Mann's channel. He's, like I said, he produced some nice videos, some fantastic art, very, very talented, and check out his videos, especially if you like MGTOW content, because his content, I would argue, is exclusively MGTOW.
Pretty much, yeah.
Pretty much, and I am a heretic, traitor to the cause. Because
I've actually put in under my on the main page, I've put some sort of not directly MGTOW related stuff, but sort of self-actualization, just thinking-based stuff that tends to connect to MGTOW, because I've told the guys that the reason I tend to always talk about women and all that kind of stuff, which tends to be the sort of foundation of most of MGTOW topics, is that's the biggest Achilles heel for stopping men to actually start thinking outside of that addiction. So I always kind of reference it to women and that addiction, because I'm convinced if you got rid of that addiction, most men would find just going their own way easier. So I think that's why I keep circling back to women and a lot of the stuff that you've already covered many years ago. So I think that's why I always find it interesting, because I think it's a central thing that I'm always drawing connections to. Even I'll start a video that I'll think, okay, this one won't be about MGTOW. It'll be about going your way in a certain philosophical or thinking way. And it always tends to reference it, because I think, there comes a point in what I'm scripting where it references women, and referencing relationships, women, and day-to-day life is something people can connect and latch onto. Whereas the more abstract I get, I lose people sometimes. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's always an issue, but I have to risk losing people sometimes in order to get my message across. So that's the way I look at it. And I have lost many people, sometimes permanently. So it comes with the territory.
Well, you tend to have a desire of love of information and knowledge for knowledge's sake. I tend to like certain things a lot more the more they're connected with day-to-day life and pedestrian social interactions.
Well, I think that's a misconception people have. I mean, I think TFM is always just like knowledge. It's not true. I like applying the knowledge, and so I can look out at the world and understand what's going on and my relationship with it. I think it's more a question of that, because there's some things, if I just merely like knowledge for knowledge's sake, I mean, I don't think I would be doing what I'm doing or have the interest I have. But that is a common misconception about me. I actually think about it. When you talk about the very nature of human behavior, then it's going to have application whenever you deal with humans, right?
Sure. I suppose you're right. Like when we were talking before, you've got a large, long view from history to future, whereas I suppose I like referencing history and future, but I'm more concerned with the immediate, how it affects people and how they think now, their lives here and now. Like I tend to think referencing things from the past or thinking about the future, how they can actually constructively benefit your life now is much more important than going too far in either the past or the future. So yeah, okay, I get it.
Well, I get that. But, well, I guess the argument I would, final argument is that somebody needs to. If nobody does, the entirety of the planet would be lost if they didn't study the past or had no concern with the future. But I realize, humans are creatures of the immediate, so that's kind of what we are. Anyway, I think we've talked for quite some time. We have now officially exceeded the 3-hour mark. That is not necessarily an accomplishment, but we are running the long-distance marathon right now. And we're not even Ethiopian or Kenyan.
Yeah, well, I better get to bed, and I've got work tomorrow. And thank you very much again, Stardust. Pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.